Chapter 667. Gambling. Or rather, resistance that lacks hope and patience. Peony acted as a commentator on one side and a commentator on the other. Her cold and clear tone was a stark contrast to the ardent scene of 1,000,000 people marching in the live camera. But Luonan was unable to interrupt. He could only listen honestly, and he felt that his knowledge had been greatly broadened. 40 years after the war, 3 generations have passed. The entire society has more or less completed the solidification of social strata. The emergence of the social authority system has made this phenomenon even more expressive. In some of the less well-run cities, people became even more restless. If there's a chance to get rich overnight, why not? You want to turn the abnormality into a normal state just because you're agitated. Bamboo Pole raised his eyebrows. The public's mentality should be more conservative, not so radical. So, you've been used, right? You should have a deduction or something. Peony slowly turned around and transmitted the scene of an even wider region for them to see. Her voice, however, was as clear and definite as always. At present, it looks like the direct driving force is money. From the perspective of public power, many people don't want to spend any more money. What do you mean? 40 years after the war, all kinds of abnormal phenomena continued to occur in the wilderness. However, did the nomadic tribes in the wilderness perish? No. According to incomplete statistics, the vagrant population has achieved 5 consecutive increases, and the population growth rate has even exceeded 2/3 of the 88 large metropolitan areas. There is not much difference in the lifespan. Zhang Yingying interrupted her. Hey, the pre-war and post-war generations are far from reaching the peak of natural deaths. But this is the situation before us. Who would care about what would happen 20 or 30 years later? Many people felt that the aberrations were nothing to be afraid of, and the overall situation was not bad. Tens of thousands of nomadic tribes, hundreds of millions of people, such a large number of people served as lab rats, living in a region with high incidence of abnormalities for decades. They don't show any signs of perishing and are even very prosperous. So why do they view them as ferocious tigers and venomous snakes and spend trillions of dollars every year to guard against them? There are also many people who think that with the arrival of the era of distortion, the genetic environment on Earth will change, and large-scale genetic pollution is almost inevitable. Large-scale expenses every year could only push back the time by a few decades at most, a generation or 2. Since this is the case, what's the point of working hard now? Bamboo Pole snorted, then sighed. That's a mutation after all. In this era, the economy is the economy of eyeballs, and politics is the politics of eyeballs. Without eyeballs, there would be nothing. For some people, the strategy developed in the early days after the war was too old-fashioned. According to the old rules of the past, throwing a huge amount of social investment into a place that everyone was used to and insensitive to did not conform to the current rules. They need to invest their money in areas that have more room for growth and more influence. Facing the distortion, coexisting with the distortion, turning it into a controllable and usable positive element, regardless of whether it can be truly realized or not. For politicians, this statement is dazzling enough to convert votes. For businessmen, it's eye-catching enough to create a whole new consumer market. Since that's the case, why not? What's more, be it politicians or businessmen, they are also members of the public. They also have a corresponding sense of crisis and gambling mentality. Whether it was the inner world or the burners, these special elements that had never appeared in the past hundreds or thousands of years were constantly infiltrating the global governance system and obtaining an increasingly important position. How many people could remain calm in the face of all this? The worst that can happen when a mutation is introduced is to slightly bring forward the inevitable trouble. Normally, a new balance can be formed. At the most ideal, they can practically control and possess this power. Why wouldn't they do this sort of gamble where there is practically no loss? Luonan basically understood Peony's explanation. This set of analysis was extremely insightful, but did she mean to say that the current situation was already a surging tide that could not be reversed? Luonan didn't really like this conclusion. It wasn't that he had any discrimination against the mutation, but he didn't like the people who controlled everything from behind. Even though he didn't really understand this person or the exact identity of this group of people. Luonan also wanted to ponder deeply, but it was a bit beyond the scope of his ability. He Wang and the others' level of analysis should far exceed his. So he wanted to hear more discussion. Something unexpected suddenly happened to the fleet of vehicles that had arrived at the live broadcast area at this time. It attracted his attention. A bit of chaos had occurred in a corner of the fleet. The reason was that a certain military hero who had been infected with the mutation virus had fainted. Under the expression of the visible mutation, that person's state had clearly fallen into an irreversible abyss. It was impossible for this military hero to participate in the welcoming ceremony in such a state. The medical vehicle that carried him immediately accelerated, leaving the fleet and speeding in a different direction. Luonan's mind stirred, and his telepathic thoughts locked onto the medical vehicle. It was clearly impossible to perform emergency treatment on a patient on the verge of death with a layer of isolation clothing separating them. Luonan anchored his telepathic thoughts once more. He didn't even have time to transmit the image back before the special coating formed by the interference of the external neuron reacted. A new indicator light lit up. There were too many relevant components, and the area within the medical vehicle was even filled with a blazing light. This change was truly unexpected. Luonan gasped in surprise as the corresponding system windows appeared one after the other. The theoretical completion rate of the advanced formula soared at a steady rate. In a short few seconds, the infected person's contribution to the formula had already surpassed Huang Bingzhen's, causing the relevant value to jump up by 2 points. Just like this, it matched up with Huang Bingzhen's side. Luonan clenched his fist in secret. This reaction didn't quite conform to the standards of morality. After all, one was a hero on the verge of death, and the other was a despicable and lecherous worm. But in terms of logic in his field of expertise, there was no difference in the nature of the two. Though he said this, Luonan's telepathic thoughts spun around in the medical vehicle. He saw the state of the military hero, and how could his heart not be moved? The tower-like man had already been imprisoned within the sterile tent. Right now he was coughing up large mouthfuls of blood, and his throat emitted a hoarse sound of leaking air. His rock-hard muscles had shriveled substantially, and the majority of his body's energy reserves had been devoured by the mutation process. This was a painful process. The stimulation of the body was secondary. The despair towards the future and the distorted illusions brought about by the mutation itself on the mental plane were enough to cause the free will that humans were so proud of to completely collapse. Luonan was able to ignore and even take the initiative to guide Huang Bingzhen's related processes because he felt that Huang Bingzhen's mental world was completely worthless. But now that he was facing Huang Bingzhen, he felt quite uncomfortable in his heart. He just wanted to cut off his telepathic thoughts. But just as his telepathic thoughts were about to leave, his mind was suddenly subtly stirred. He didn't realize what was going on for a time. His consciousness stagnated for half a second, and it was also at this moment that a corner of the densely packed indicator lights within the medical vehicle extinguished. Though the patient had already taken off the isolation suit, the surrounding area was still equipped with a sterile tent. This provided a very good concealment effect. For a short period of time, no germs would leak out. At the very least, the few raw materials listed in the advanced formula were all enclosed within this area. They were extremely concentrated. But during the half a second that Luonan's consciousness stagnated, there were a few corresponding indicator lights that suddenly disappeared without a trace. Within the virtual brain system, The complete degree of the advanced formula of the medium was displayed. There were no changes. The relevant data only reflected the problem of having or not having it. There were no requirements for the quantity to increase or decrease. But the indicator lights continuously extinguished. It was too strange. Was it because the germs, raw materials, and so on were exposed to the air? Was it because they weren't able to adapt to the environment? But the other raw materials of the same type were clearly still perfectly fine. Luo Nan naturally shifted his consciousness to the area where the indicator lights were extinguished. Similar situations continued to occur during this period of time. Fortunately, after a few seconds of inspection, Luo Nan shrunk his range once more. He focused on the edge of the treatment bed, on a certain rescue worker. After observing for a few more seconds, Luo Nan really wanted to say to this person, "Hey, your isolation suit has a tear." Yes, this rescue worker had been busy all this time. The isolation suit on his body wasn't completely sealed. A portion of his skin was separated by a thin, breathable undergarment. It was exposed to the air. No one would pay attention to this sort of detail in the midst of all this chaos. In theory, his self-contained defense system should have alerted him, but it didn't. Luo Nan believed that this was most likely due to this person taking the initiative to turn it off. This irregular operation caused the person's exposed undergarment to transform into a net. It swayed a few times in an environment brimming with fatal threats, and it was covered in the blood and saliva of the infected person coughing up. There were also skin tissues stripped off from the rescue, and so on. There might even be floating germs and other special compounds. Was this person courting death? Clearly not. From Luo Nan's perspective, this person was simply using a speed that could be seen with his eyes to collect the things that were covered in the grid. No, he was sucking them into a deeper layer. Luo Nan raised the precision of his observation to the highest level. He only vaguely discovered something through the concealment of the clothes. It was this person. Some hairs were bizarrely retracting in and out from the pores of his skin. They could stretch out 2 to 3 centimeters at their longest. They were like slender probes. They interacted with the contaminated things on the undergarment. Then they rapidly extracted a portion of the miscellaneous substances from the hairs. They were even refined. Only then did they pass through the hollow pipes of the hairs to be absorbed into the body. It was as if there was another person hiding under the skin of this medical worker, carrying out a series of precise operations. Or perhaps it was a monster. No matter what it was, they were only interested in the raw materials of the advanced formula. Luo Nan couldn't help but associate this with Xia City, with the sarcoma parasitic within Li Yiwei's womb. One was hidden within, and the other was exposed outside. If their functions were pieced together according to their goals, everything would become a matter of course. Gathering raw materials and storing them. Chapter 668. Luo Nan's palms were slightly sweaty. The entire process he had witnessed was truly horrifying. It was like a stimulant that directly injected into his thoughts. It made him uncontrollably make associations and comparisons. He didn't waste time and energy to observe. His thoughts jumped back to Xia City and cut into the virtual brain's interface. He used the limited senses here to observe the remains of the biochemical reactor within Li Yiwei's womb. He looked at the changes in the state of the parasitic mutant. In particular, the densely packed veins and nerve. Luo Nan matched them one by one with the remaining structures of the breeding room. He also tried to use his half-baked anatomy to analyze the corresponding external direction. The more he analyzed, the more certain he became. It's the same. The two sides should be the same. A preliminary conclusion was reached. The manipulator behind the scenes had kept the cultivation room of the biochemical reactor wreckage as a warehouse to store the raw materials for the advanced formula. And no matter what the future of the aberration was, at least for now, it was searching for and absorbing the relevant raw materials for the advanced formula in the external world through the host's body and through its wonderful biological instincts. Having one such parasitic mutant was stimulating enough. But who would have thought that 2,000 kilometers away, there was actually another of the same species? This one was even more active and was carrying out the same work. The biochemical reactor of an extraterrestrial civilization. The parasitic mutant that had uncontrollably differentiated within the body of the reactor. The same structure and functional pattern. If this was a coincidence, then wasn't this world a bit too inconceivable? Luonan wanted to know, no matter what, just how many of these similar things were out there. Well, Luonan still lacked a crucial piece of evidence. His soul cloak was limited by its physical properties and precision. It was impossible for it to penetrate the opponent's body and give the opponent an X-ray. He lacked a final hammer. He was unable to confirm whether or not the two targets 2,000 kilometers away were completely the same. He also lacked an understanding of their characteristics and nature. What should he do? After thinking it over, the most direct and ideal method was to use the interference waves formed by the external neuron. As long as he sent the interference waves over, everything would be clear. However, the interference waves ultimately needed to propagate on the material plane. They obeyed the physical laws of space and time. This kind of propagation would inevitably consume a corresponding amount of energy. For example, Luonan's method of dealing with Liyue was only a few hundred meters away. Everything was fine, but a distance of several thousand kilometers. Luonan used the virtual brain system to clearly understand the relevant physical properties of interference waves. He even calculated the structure of the soul cloak, automatically forming a simple model. The results of his calculations weren't ideal. This interference wave was not an electromagnetic wave, so it was difficult to use the ionosphere to reflect it. Even with the soul cape interfering with the water molecular structure, even if it was directional conduction, even if there was no need to calculate the feedback, it would still require a transmission power of at least 20 kilowatts for a long time, which was basically equivalent to a mobile signal tower. Luonan pondered seriously for a moment. Everything else was easy to handle. For example, although the structure of the interference wave conduction was complex, there was a corresponding template within the virtual brain system. It could be used with a bit of modification. The soul cloak, which was spread all over the world, could basically be used as a transmission medium, saving a lot of effort. Luonan could casually find several hundred to 1,000 of these 20 kilowatts of similar power in the large living area. But this was all built upon the foundation of a complete energy center's hardware. If it was a single person, if they really wanted to launch it, based on the corresponding structure, the movement would probably be quite exaggerated. Let's stop here for now. Luonan certainly needed to get to the bottom of the matter of the harvester. Then he could only make a swap. He couldn't count on it from 2,000 kilometers away. It shouldn't be a problem if it was close at hand, right? By the time Luonan's attention was drawn to the new situation and new problems, the live broadcast had officially begun over at Spring City. The sense of ceremony and solemnity of the live broadcast was very good. Whether it was the professional politicians or the participants who had personal feelings, their emotions were in place, and they were relatively restrained. An enormous tension was formed from this. There were a few moments when the millions upon millions of marching troops were actually deathly silent. Even He Yuan and the others, who were watching the live broadcast from 2,000 kilometers away, had solemn expressions. Only Luonan was unable to blend into all of this no matter what. From his perspective, the reality of the world he saw was perhaps more direct than the political explanation. But how should he explain and verify all of this to others? There should be a more direct beneficiary. He Yuan suddenly spoke when the short live broadcast was nearing its end. In the current society, before a complete concept is formed in the minds of the politicians, there will usually be a more direct interest group. They will obtain early profits from this. Then they will throw the mess to their blind followers, as well as the vast majority of the world's silent people. Over at the office, even Luo Nan, who was racking his brains, was pricked by this sharp and extreme way of speaking. He raised his head in astonishment. Shouldn't this be the way Zhang Yingying or Bamboo Pole would describe it? Suddenly hearing it from He Yuan's mouth really gave people a fright. Perhaps it was because she wasn't familiar with it, but Peony seemed to be quite used to it. She maintained the angle of the live broadcast and gave a response in the first instance. If there is such an interest group, then the greatest suspect is certainly the person who proposed the concept of controllable distortion and the fellow who displayed this possibility. But I don't believe that there's any need to find this group. Even if it's according to your theory, they should have already succeeded and retreated. He Wing just asked, "Are there any suspects?" "There are. And there are two of them." Zhang Yingying snorted with laughter. Quantum Corporation is definitely one of them. The Rainbow Fund is jumping around quite happily today. That Li Yiwei is also a member of their system. That's right. One of them is Quantum Corporation. They support the Apocalypse Laboratory with all their might. They have engaged in the development of the human body's potential, genetic engineering, distortion theory, and other related fields of research for many years. They have accumulated abundant technology. A bit of it leaked to Deep Blue Laboratory, and it perfectly combined with the archetype format, completely paving the path of the burners. Technically speaking, they are the most suspicious. Luo Nan's cheeks twitched a bit when he heard the words archetype format. However, his attention was still focused on the Apocalypse Laboratory. This mysterious laboratory didn't have a great reputation among ordinary people, but it was a key existence that was circled in the intelligence data of the upper echelons of the inner world. Peony didn't continue. Instead, she jumped to another suspicious direction. As for the other one, the gene exchange. Bamboo Pole and Zhang Yingying spoke in unison. Luo Yuan. Yes. According to the intelligence, Mr. Luo Yuan, who just rose to prominence not too long ago, has continuously absorbed several large investments. His business is flourishing, and his status is rising with it. So much so that the partner of our school's scientific research activity this time is this person. I heard that my teacher has met him before. They have some friendly relations in the past. Ah. Luo Yuan is in Spring City. Luo Nan truly jumped in fright. He had once met and exchanged blows with this Luo Yuan. He had even been put into a very sorry state by the planar crossbow. Luo Yuan was truly the greatest enemy of his life. However, on the level of society in the secular world, Luo Nan suddenly discovered that Luo Yuan was so close to him. This truly exceeded his imagination. It seems to be a long-distance communication. We can't confirm his location at the moment. Is that so? Luo Nan's brows furrowed. Just this alone was quite astonishing. This person gave him an extremely deep impression. Because of this, Luo Nan felt a dense sense of crisis. Luo Nan saw that Peony and the others still wanted to continue discussing in general, doing some situation analysis and the like. In the end, he couldn't help but speak. Isn't there a more direct goal? Peony didn't understand his words for a time. Direct goal? From beginning to end, Luo Nan's mind was anchored to the harvester that was several dozen meters away. This truly bizarre device was more persuasive than 10,000 words. Deducing the cause from the result naturally formed a complete logic. He worked hard to choose his words, trying to make his meaning clearer. Designing the stage and fiddling with society are admittedly very high-end operations. But for some people, aren't they taking too many detours? Perhaps there really is such a grand scheme that takes 10 years to complete, but let's not pay too much attention to it for now. We should be able to dig out some details from the current situation of Xia City and Spring City. Luo Nan's ability to express himself was truly terrible. These words were practically the same as tossing aside the main topic of Peony's discussion. He had already offended people under normal circumstances. Even Zhang Yingying quietly rolled her eyes, but he was completely unaware of it. Peony was quite aloof. She even had the leisure to ask, for example? For example, the contact between Li Yiwei and Huang Bingzhen. The push before the distortion. This already exists, but after the distortion they still haven't made contact. Clearly, this is due to our interference. If we can see their current performance after they meet, we should be able to gain something. Especially Li Yiwei. Actually, Luonan didn't mean to deny Peony's words. On the contrary, he was able to grasp the manipulator behind the scenes more clearly after some discussion. He had dealt with Luo Yuan before, and he was an old adversary of Quantum Corporation. Now that he had a general direction and his Soul Cape sensing network that covered the entire world, he had a great chance of following the clues to the melon as long as he was able to strike the key material evidence. He would understand the entire situation. His ability to express himself was hopelessly clumsy, but he wasn't stupid. As time passed, his thoughts gradually progressed, and his mind became clearer and clearer. It didn't matter if the enemy had planned this long ago, or if Huang Bingzhen had acted on his own. The intense hostility that came from the mental plane was extremely targeted. It wouldn't lie. Starting with Shui Yi meant that Moya was only a paper-thin distance away. This was a real threat to him, to his family. Since there was a real threat, then there must be a real source of danger. Then finding it and eliminating it was the most realistic consideration. As for the general trend, it was only for reference. Nothing else mattered. Luonan's 10 fingers intertwined, and his elbows rested on the table. His lips covered the space between his thumb and forefinger. His voice was a bit muffled, but his meaning was firm and unshakable. Chapter 669. He Yuan, Zhang Yingying, and Bamboo Pole shifted their gazes over to focus on Luonan. Luonan had played the role of a listener and a learner since the start of the small meeting. But when he really put forward a suggestion, his authority naturally leaped to the highest level. This method is feasible. Bamboo Pole was the first to respond. He even gave his theoretical support. Li Yiwei is a woman of few words. Her mouth is hard to pry open. Perhaps it's more reliable to observe her reactions under special circumstances. I believe in the boss's observation and judgment. If we can use this to dig out the details and know the enemy's specific methods, then it will be good to counter each move as it comes. Then I'll go get the person. Zhang Yingying simply stood up and expressed her position. She mocked her competitor in passing. We need to analyze the situation, but we can't be lacking in practical testing. Peony stopped the live broadcast. She calmly stated, going against the flow of the general trend will most likely not lead to a good result. The Ability User Society has always been quite active on the issue of distortion. It would be best if they could continue to maintain it. As for the conflict in the details, it has nothing to do with the matter of my report. Peony paused for a moment before saying, I've pretty much explained the current situation. It's just a foolish opinion. It's for reference only. Everyone wants to carry out the operation. I wish you all the best. If you have any problems, contact me at any time. Peony had been recommended by Her Majesty Empress Wu to report the situation. No matter how ignorant Luonan was, he still knew the basic courtesy. He rushed to express his thanks in the mission channel. You're welcome. But Mr. Partner, please allow me to say one more thing. Don't be in a hurry to take a stand. You should make your attitude clear as soon as possible. All right, I won't disturb your work. See you later. The call ended. Luonan was truly confused this time. Stance and attitude. What was that again? Then he heard Bamboo Pole sigh. What an intelligent beauty. Have you seen her before? You said she's a beauty? Hee, I can confirm it just by looking at your jealousy and the boss's expression. Hey, stop messing around. The boss has already given his orders. Let's take advantage of the fact that the pressure from all sides hasn't reached their peak. Let's finish this test first. Luonan approved of this point. Since he was unable to understand Peony's suggestion, he set it aside for the time being. He wholeheartedly considered the following test. When they meet, they need to make direct contact. They can't be separated by protective clothing. Luonan's words were clearly against the rules. Although mutated infected people had never happened, and theoretically, it was impossible for a situation like droplet infection to occur in a public place, it would still be quite eye-catching and easy to be criticized. Let's do it in the treatment room. Let them confront each other. He Wayne made the final decision. How could Huang Bingjin, who had basically lost his consciousness, confront him? Everyone was well aware of this, but no one had any objections. Just like this, Bamboo Pole and Zhang Yingying went to arrange for the person to be picked up, while He Wayne and Luonan went to the treatment room to wait. When he went out, Qin Yikuan and God followed him and continued to perform their duties. On the way, Luonan couldn't help but express his thanks once more. I've troubled you, Sister Ywain. He Ywain shook her head slightly. You're the one who's going to trouble me. You're undertaking work outside of teaching and research. However, capable people do more work. Depending on how the situation develops, there might be more situations like this in the future. Will the situation get worse and worse? It's not that bad. It's just a temporary integration of the unfinished chaos. On the scale of the universe, it's not that significant. But if it's always like this, it'll probably be meaningless in the future. Luonan blinked. Sister Ywain, why did you learn from Peony and start being mysterious? Oh my Ywain. Sister. You're still hopelessly pessimistic after so many years. What's the point? You still have me. This tone, Tian Bang. A certain reserved node within Luonan's sensing network suddenly radiated a scorching radiance along with these words, and the distance was so close that it made Luonan feel a bit oppressed. Tian Bang beamed as he stood out from the corner up ahead. He waved at the two. It would be hard for people to believe purely based on first impressions. This seemingly young and unreliable man was actually a major general of the military with true authority. He even had the reputation of being the #1 person beneath the extraordinary. Truth be told, Luonan really admired this person, but he never liked the tone of his voice. In particular, his attitude of clearly pursuing He Wayne made Luonan feel a subtle feeling of offense in his heart. Tian Bang's appearance here wasn't strange. Luonan felt that he had come too late when compared to the seriousness of the situation. He Wayne left him a message in the mission channel at this time. Tian Bang only knows of 22 cases of mutant infection. Luonan understood in an instant. He had a yardstick in his mind. In the end, he was an outsider. Tian Bang, this outsider, was quite close to Luonan. Hello, Chief Luo. I'm very sorry for my suggestion the other day. I should have considered your attribute as the center of the hurricane. Aside from gathering trouble, you should have caused many things to deviate from the established track. Look, half the night hasn't passed yet, but I can't see any elements related to the Blood Intent Ring's fortress. This should be considered a kind joke. At least this was what it showed on the mental plane. But Luonan couldn't find a way to respond other than twitching his lips. This fellow Tian Bang was simply a scoundrel when he wasn't wearing a military uniform. All right, it seemed that Luonan really had never seen this brother wear a military uniform before. Perhaps this was some sort of self-awareness? We need to immediately engage in a non-interference conversation with Researcher Lee. What in the world do you guys want by bringing her here? The treatment room Huang Bingjin was in wasn't far from the police station. They arrived in the time it took to exchange a few words. However, some people arrived even earlier than them. The senior executive of the Rainbow Fund, who had gone to the police station to negotiate with He Wang, as well as the fund's professional legal officer, Lawyer Zhu, had returned. They appeared to be even more excited than before. It wasn't that the methods of Luonan and the others were infuriating. It was that there were other people here besides the two of them. Among them, the most important person was the general manager of Quantum Corporation's Xia City branch, Mr. Hu Yuli. This general manager, whose luck hadn't been smooth recently. He had just been demoted and marginalized due to the human-faced arachnid incident. The two managers who had replaced him had gone on a vacation, one after the other due to their own reasons. Hu Yuli had to take a salary far lower than before, and he had to do even worse work than before. Come on, he was just a high-level worker. He didn't possess any extraordinary powers, nor had he undergone any body modifications. What could he use to fight against a group of powerful people from the inner world? The resentment in General Manager, whose heart was so deep that it piled up so much secondary energy that Luo Nan gave him a few extra glances. At this time, the always gloomy and cold Li Wei finally found a stage to perform on. Her expression changed quite a bit. She struggled. She resisted. She displayed an attitude of being unwilling to enter the treatment room. This gave Lawyer Zhu the best material. He had already become the main force of the assault. He used his wristband to crazily capture first-hand information while shouting loudly, "Look! Look! This is a threat. This is a crime. This is a Nazi concentration camp. You guys are pushing her into a gas chamber. How noisy." Luo Nan remembered that this lawyer Zhu had been Yen Yongbua's lackey some time ago. He had once been together with Yen Yongbua to threaten him and his aunt's family. Luo Nan didn't expect that his master would still jump so much even though he had changed several times. This wasn't a problem that Luo Nan was concerned about. He just wanted to understand clearly from the upcoming confrontation. He wanted to know how Li Wei would react after seeing Huang Bingzhen, who was already half a mutant. Of course, the most important thing was still the monster that lived within her womb. How would she react? The problem was that Lawyer Zhu and his group were currently interfering with his research environment. Luo Nan was quite annoyed. Of course, Lawyer Zhu also noticed Luo Nan's group of people coming over. He still had a deep impression of the miner leading them. He had once researched the information on this youth named Luo Nan. It was back when Yen Yongbua was in charge of the Rainbow Fund. He had once tried to trap this youth and his family in a maelstrom of lawsuits, slowly torturing them. But he never expected that Yen Yongbua would be forced to take a vacation a few days later. There was no further development to this matter. They met again several months later. This youth's status had clearly undergone an earth-shattering change. Lawyer Zhu instinctively felt a bit guilty when he met Luo Nan's gaze. He subconsciously tilted his head. But that indescribably irritated gaze gave him a heavy punch, causing the pressure in his heart to suddenly increase. Fortunately, the main force wasn't him. It wasn't Hu Yuli either. Hu Yuli was the highest person in charge of Quantum Corporation in Xia City. He didn't take the lead even though he personally arrived. He just let Lawyer Zhu bark to create pressure and influence. They didn't hope to directly solve the problem from the legal level. Another 7 or 8 people came one after another as Lawyer Zhu sprayed his saliva. Some of them were people who had previously pressured the Xia City branch. Some of them were people who came to express the concern of power figures. Once the scale was about right, they would come up with a new routine. Mr. Luo, Vice President He. Oh, and Major General Tian. The manager of the Starry Sky Club, Madame Sun Jiai, arrived with a bitter smile. From her expression, it could be seen that Sun Jiai wasn't particularly fond of this assignment. Her words were quite cautious. She tried to display a neutral stance at the beginning. I've been entrusted by the organizers and co-organizers of Xia City's New Year's Eve feast to act as a coordinator. I hope that this matter involving Mrs. Li Wei can be resolved appropriately so that it won't cause any adverse effects. Regardless of the differences between everyone, we hope to be able to sit down and talk. We hope to communicate patiently. Bamboo Pole, who had just escorted Li Wei over, left a message in the mission channel. Look, Peony's statement has already been verified. Luonan sent a question mark. He Yuan gave a simple explanation. There should be quite a few interested parties involved in this matter. Therefore, Quantum Corporation can't make a quick decision, so they naturally entered a conservative negotiation mode. This should be the result of many parties discussing and compromising. Bamboo Pole, you deal with it. As you command. Bamboo Pole didn't decline. He beamed as he stood at the entrance of the treatment room. He faced off against his old friend. We've never severed our communication channels. Of course, we won't stop investigating the case. Right now, we have conclusive evidence that proves that Mrs. Li Yiwei is closely related to the high-risk suspect who spread a certain virus. Therefore, we need her to confront the other person involved, Mr. Huang. This is a very serious process of investigating the case. It's two different matters from communication and explanation. The two can't contradict each other. Sun Jie tried to pull the two lines together, but they can also promote each other. Of course, once we make progress in the case, we will need everyone's cooperation. We will continue to dig deeper for clues. When the time comes, we will certainly communicate with everyone one by one and be frank with everyone. The expressions of the surrounding people didn't look too good when these words were spoken. You're threatening me. This is a threat. Lawyer Zhu tried to assist Sun Jie. I said long ago that if you want to investigate the case, you must immediately show authorization from the police and security departments. Moreover, where are the police personnel? Where are the medical personnel? Your procedures are completely illegal. You're completely relying on force to carry out illegal imprisonment and interrogation. Sun Jie's brows furrowed. Could it be that she had deliberately pointed out Major General Tian, just to throw flirtatious glances at the blind? Lawyer Zhu was completely unaware of the dissatisfaction of his partner beside him. In his heart, he was bewildered with excitement. He felt that he had already found an excellent breakthrough. Mrs. Li Yiwei is right here. I request to immediately verify with her. When you forcibly took her away from the New Year's Eve party backstage, did you follow the relevant procedures? Before he could finish speaking, a long sigh interjected. Procedures? I find it strange. I, a Grand Major General of the Field Army, am here to assist Chief Luo and Vice President He in handling the case. But you, a large group of people, are jumping up and down. In the end, you can't even find an influential professional bureaucrat or department head to support you. What's going on? Don't you have the slightest idea in your heart? Once these words were spoken, the outside of the treatment room seemed to freeze. The group of people were absolutely silent. Sun Jie secretly rolled her eyes. She simply watched with the cold eyes of a bystander. Relying on Lawyer Zhu's assistance, Tian Bang successfully used an AoE to clear the field. After stealing all the limelight, he turned his head and whispered to He Yuan, "You owe me a meal. How about we go to the high-altitude revolving restaurant to eat a little supper?" He Yuan didn't pay any attention to him. Luonan shot a glance over and didn't say anything. He didn't wait for Li Yiwei, who was still struggling, to walk straight into the treatment room. He didn't have any protection whatsoever. He Yuan, Tian Bang, and Zhang Yingying were all like this. As for the bodyguards, Qin Yikuan followed them inside. Gauda stood guard outside. The originally spacious treatment room was instantly filled by more than half. Bamboo Pole was still beaming as he stood at the door. We understand everyone's concerns very clearly. But please be at ease, everyone. We have obtained authorization from the relevant departments, and our actions have always been open and fair. We don't reject supervision. We have specially prepared some evidence and information for everyone. There are videos and test reports inside. They sufficiently prove that Ms. Li Yiwei is a major suspect in this matter. Everyone can go to the conference room on this floor to watch and examine. If you are worried about the confrontation itself, the treatment room itself is very transparent. You can see all the details through the glass. Everyone can even come inside to supervise. As long as you don't intentionally interfere with the process of the case, we absolutely won't say anything. No one actually responded for a time. It was unknown when a large space had been left empty outside the treatment room's door. Bamboo Pole wore a smile on his face as he invited Li Yiwei inside. Then he turned his head and winked at Sun Jiai before saying, "Then, I'll be closing the door?" Chapter 670. It was finally quiet. Luonan's mood improved quite a bit after entering the treatment room. This fellow Tianbang was annoying, but he was still quite useful. He was able to seize Lawyer Zhu's flaw and clear the scene in one fell swoop. The pressure he exerted on that fellow in secret was not in vain. Luonan was finally able to see some clues from the structure of the group on the mental plane from the words He Wang and Bamboo Pole had said. They were outwardly strong but inwardly weak. They were cowardly and overcautious. They weren't even comparable to a tortoise shell. At best, they were like a pillowcase filled with self-deceiving fine feathers. They would transform into other shapes with the slightest bit of external stimulation. On the other hand, Sun Jiai didn't stir on the mental plane. She was like a deep pool, like cold ice. Her bottom couldn't be seen at a glance. She was truly a ruthless character. Luonan only went through the structure of the mental plane once in his mind before he was quickly pushed into a corner. Luonan's most important mission right now was to verify the fundamental functions of the parasitic mutant within Li Yiwei's womb. He needed to find out if this object was the same model as the one 2,000 kilometers away. He needed to dig out the internal connections and background. He needed to place concrete evidence before everyone. However, the first thing Luonan sensed here was not the immediate state of Li Yiwei or Huang Bingzhen. Instead, he sensed an extra aura within the shadows. The aura penetrated through the wall and then stopped in the shadows of the corner. It was clearly within reach, but all the ability users, including Tianbang and He Wang, were completely unaware of it. Rui Wen had returned and informed Luonan on the mental plane. Actually, Luonan didn't need Rui Wen to tell him. He had already sensed the special existence of the Jintong Soul Light Seed. "I've already retrieved it." With a thought, the rapidly shrinking spatial distance caused the Jintong Soul Light Seed to produce an unprecedented restlessness. This was reflected in the virtual brain's system interface. The two elements, the Soul Light Seed and the biochemical reactor, seemed to be loading something into their respective interfaces. The closer the distance, the more interesting the reaction. Then what would happen if they made substantial contact? Luonan was already impatient, but things needed to be done step by step. Li Yiwei had already been brought into the treatment room. She no longer engaged in pointless struggles. She just used her usual gloomy gaze to sweep across the faces of Luonan and the others. She seemed to be assessing the current situation. Perhaps it was because of the intense movements earlier, her face was slightly red. From Luonan's perspective, the flow of this woman's blood and energy, the secretion of glands, and the conduction of nerve signals were much more frequent and vivid than normal. The fluctuations on the mental plane were much more distinct. From the looks of it, this was a very logical change. Luonan's gaze swept up and down. In the end, he laughed and took the initiative to speak to Li Yiwei. "Is it the master or is it the host? There's no harm in proving it." In just a few words, there must be words that made Li Yiwei's heart throb. Her eyelids twitched a little, and she replied in a hoarse voice, "I don't understand what you're saying." "I don't care what you say." The simple conversation between the two attracted the attention of the others present. Everyone looked over curiously, but no one said a word. Bamboo Pole, who was the last to enter, winked at Zhang Yingying. The boss must have opened another line of logic. The latter pursed his lips. "I hope they can understand." Actually, Luonan already understood by now. It was just as he said. He didn't care what Li Yiwei said. The so-called confrontation had always been just a pretext. He didn't need Li Yiwei and Huang Bingzhen to communicate verbally. They didn't even need to have any concrete contact. This was because the connection between the two had been established the moment Li Yiwei stepped into the treatment room. Under the detection mechanism of the external neuron, a dazzling signal light lit up in the treatment room at this time. There were 4 kinds of raw materials for the advanced formula distributed in the air. These raw materials all came from Huang Bingjun, who was in the process of the mutation, and 2 of them were components that didn't exist in the warehouse of the harvester within Li Yiwei's body. Luo Nan was incomparably certain of this with the relevant list of information from the virtual brain system. In a formal sense, Huang Bingjun's degree of infection exceeded that of the military hero 2,000 kilometers away. But due to its recessive characteristics, perhaps it was the result of Luo Nan's guidance. His symptoms were much lighter than that of the hero 2,000 kilometers away. He didn't cough up blood. He didn't have any obvious internal or external injuries. It was just that the mutation had sucked away too much of his body's energy. The hospital only used all sorts of catheters to inject nutrients that could maintain his vital signs. The treatment room didn't have a sterile tent set up, so the components produced by the mutation were like spores that were hard to see with the naked eye. They drifted all over the room. They didn't directly react with normal people. The self-format of ability users possessed a certain degree of defensive and repulsive power against them. But Li Yiwei was different. At the very least, the parasitic mutant within her body had already begun to move. The fine blood vessels and nerves within the monster became extremely excited. The frequency and amplitude of their pulsations increased, and a change occurred in its structure. The series of fluctuations produced by the monster's body passed through the breeding room and magnified it. Then it was monitored and combed by the virtual brain system. It was roughly restored to a set of dynamic images with a clear center and a blurry surroundings. Luo Nan had already grasped the corresponding state within the reaction furnace. But outside the reaction furnace, within Li Yiwei's subcutaneous tissues, the abnormal activity in this region was limited by the precision of his senses. Luo Nan couldn't see it too clearly, but he could indirectly confirm it. It affected the changes in Li Yiwei's physiological and mental state as a whole. It was clear that the parasitic monster's infiltration of Li Yiwei had already reached an extremely deep degree. Perhaps it had already extended through the blood vessels and nerves, directly reaching the lowest level of emotional instincts. It wasn't just a simple uterine fibroid. Its camouflage under normal conditions was quite amazing. It was able to completely hide from all kinds of high-end detection equipment. But under the current special environment, they didn't have the slightest intention of concealing their intentions within the surface region of the body. They directly restored their true appearance, collecting and transmitting probes and soft tubes. Even though Li Yiwei stood near the outer region of the treatment room, she was still 7 or 8 meters away from Huang Bingjun's bed. But there seemed to be some sort of incorporeal magnetic force on her body that specifically targeted those fluttering spores. Her snow-white shirt soon attracted large amounts of floating matter that were hard to see with the naked eye. And the probes that extended out from the pores on the surface of her body behaved exactly the same as their counterparts 2,000 kilometers away. They were all separated by her white shirt, wantonly collecting and devouring these raw material carriers. Then they were transported through the corresponding channels back to the reaction furnace within Li Yiwei's womb. Luo Nan couldn't see the lens from 2,000 kilometers away due to the monitoring of the virtual brain system. It was clearly displayed here. Within a short span of 3 to 5 seconds, the corresponding components were transported through the blood vessels and nerves into the culture room. They were classified and stored in the corresponding vesicles, and the storage was endlessly increased. Though there were thousands of channels, there wasn't the slightest bit of chaos. This was the center of the parasitic monster within the remains of the biochemical reaction furnace. It was a collection, refinement, classification, and storage system that operated at high speed. The established facts confirmed that Luo Nan's conjecture wasn't wrong. Li Yiwei here and the medical worker 2,000 kilometers away had such a system implanted within their bodies. And at this time, a crucial question emerged. Luonan wanted to ask, do you know about the parasitic monster within your bodies? Do you know the true function of the parasitic monster? Do you have any control over it? Li Yiwei was already nervous on the mental plane. Under these circumstances, what a normal person should do the most was to conceal her emotions, conceal all of her small movements that would lead to her being exposed. It must be known that Li Yiwei was currently a detained suspect. Everyone within this treatment room was eyeing her like a tiger watching its prey. Luonan was a master of perception. He Yuan and Tianbang were elite burners. Bamboo Pole was a B-rank psychic. The 5 senses and 6 senses of this group of people far exceeded common sense. It could be said that this was the most dangerous area for Li Yiwei. There was no other. Yet the system within Li Yiwei's womb did not stop collecting even in this state. Yes, there was no concealment whatsoever. This system simply didn't care about the host's current circumstances. It did what it needed to do. It was completely at odds with the host's emotions and circumstances. Luonan couldn't help but suspect that as the host, Li Yiwei not only lacked control over the parasitic monster that hid within her vital organs, but she didn't even have enough basic perceptual abilities. Don't you feel that there's something wrong with the smell? Tianbang suddenly spoke. Soon his gaze focused on Li Yiwei's body. His eyes were filled with layers of suspicion. Sure enough, the matters of the world couldn't withstand nagging. The perceptual sensitivity of this world's apex burner was far beyond that of an ordinary person. He quickly detected the minute abnormality. However, everyone's gazes turned to Luonan when Tianbang opened his mouth. Soon, even Tianbang did the same. After all, Luonan was the one who put forward this proposal. He was also publicly recognized as the apex master of perception in this world. Most importantly, everyone could see that, perhaps Luonan had already made up his mind. There really is a problem. This was probably the most ideal situation that Luonan could think of. He also felt that this was an excellent opportunity to break down Li Yiwei's mental defenses. Mrs. Li, Researcher Li, I want to ask you, do you feel that there's a region within your body? A region that doesn't belong to you. It's especially restless? Luonan imitated a few postures he learned from movies and began a deliberately mystifying performance. His acting skills were hopeless, but reality was unbreakable. Li Yiwei's face went rigid in an instant. Correspondingly, great waves rolled over and over on the mental plane. It was hard to stop. This was a situation that had never occurred since the confrontation of the interrogation. Everyone's gazes turned over in unison. But even in such a situation, the collection and storage system continued to operate steadily. This automated collection device undoubtedly treated its own functions as the highest authority. The life and death of the host were not within the scope of its consideration. This also confirmed that even though Li Yiwei had a bit of understanding towards the existence of the system, his control over it was pitifully weak. Zhang Yingying went, Not too long ago, she had brought Li Yiwei to the hospital for a full set of examinations. She was exceptionally shocked by this result. Within your body? Where? In the end, Luonan's acting skills were terrible. He deliberately wanted to be deliberately mystifying, but he was a bit unable to grasp the situation. He just bluntly said, the inside of the uterus. That's sarcoma. You can't be treating it as a uterine fibroid, right? Li Yiwei's expression suddenly changed. But Luonan's expression also changed at this moment. This was because a system message clearly flashed on the virtual brain interface. Chapter 671. Only Luonan could see the information of the virtual brain system. The external state of affairs continued to proceed according to the established tempo. Her greatest secret was directly exposed by Luonan, and Li Yiwei instinctively retreated. Her feet staggered a bit, reflecting the fact that she lacked extraordinary strength. But as she retreated, the intensity of her emotions skyrocketed, quickly surpassing a certain threshold. Perhaps it was this stimulation that stimulated the natural secretion of the human body. The corresponding hormones passed through specific neurons to generate specific nerve signals that were transmitted all the way to the parasitic mutant. The sarcoma within the uterus began a new round of wriggling. This action did not correspond with the main function of collecting and storing. It was truly a stress response to the external situation. Luo Nan confirmed from this that Li Yiwei had a certain degree of control over the sarcoma. Under the stimulation, a portion of the sarcoma's stored energy was stimulated. Some of the vesicles within the incubation room ruptured, sending some special substances stored within them through the dense blood vessels and nerves that ran through the parasitic monster and the host to all parts of the body. This was similar to the effects of drug stimulation and backup batteries, and the external changes were truly astonishing. Li Yiwei's pale skin darkened in the time it took to take a breath. There were some changes in the structure of her muscles as well. The transformation process did not happen overnight, but the eyes of most people in the treatment room lit up at the same time. Zhang Yingying had already cried out, "Pharmacist! Wasn't this the true suspect that they had been unable to find all this time? Even if it was just an embryonic form." Bamboo Pole immediately reminded, "Restrain her. Be careful of the drugs." He Yuan didn't say a word. Her figure charged forward. She had the highest position aside from Luo Nan, but as a burner proficient in close combat, there was no one more suitable than her to make a move. Luo Nan, who was forcefully blocked by Qi Nikuan, yelled at this time, "Don't!" He Yuan was startled, but she soon realized that these words were not directed at her. Li Yiwei's footsteps became even more chaotic as she continued to retreat. The round of drug stimulation and charging under her control did not bring about the power to save her. On the contrary, as the corresponding substances passed through the blood vessels and nerves connecting her and the parasitic monster in large doses, the terrible negative effects rapidly spread out. Another round of wriggling appeared within the sarcoma within the uterus. This was completely an instinctive convulsion. At this moment, the parasitic monster was like a slug that had been poured with too much salt. It rapidly lost its energy and vitality and began to shrink rapidly. The atrophy was comprehensive, including the main body that was parasitized in the remains of the biochemical reactor, as well as all the blood vessels and nerves that spread out. Those probes and tubes were originally its most important tentacle tools, but in the blink of an eye, they had entered an irreversible process of destruction. Because they were highly substitutes for Li Yiwei's veins and neural networks, their atrophy represented the atrophy or even dissolution of Li Yiwei's veins and neural network. Li Yiwei finally understood the terrible situation of her family. She could no longer maintain the gloominess and indifference on her face, but she was facing paralysis and distortion. Ironically, she still did not know the source of the disaster. "What did you do to me?" The shrill voice that was originally suppressed in his throat turned into a hissing sound of air leaking. In the time it took to finish the sentence, Li Yiwei's entire body collapsed. His skin shriveled and his muscles curled as if he had instantly lost half of his body weight. Even his eyeballs had sunk into two empty holes. People's cries of alarm could be heard from outside the treatment room. The impact of the sudden change in the situation was too much for these people to handle. "Get back! Tianbang!" He Yuan barked an order. She herself didn't retreat, but instead advanced. She took a step forward, and in the blink of an eye, she was face to face with Li Yiwei. A blazing white flame burst forth between the two. Her fist bombarded Li Yiwei's lower abdomen, and the format of fire penetrated her body. Li Yiwei fell backwards. Luo Nan could see that He Yuan's attack wasn't purely for the sake of knocking Li Yiwei down. Instead, she used the special nature of the format of fire to forcefully interrupt the negative effects within Li Yiwei's body, preventing her from dying in the first instance. After this attack, He Yueng took advantage of the situation to grab Li Yiwei and lay her flat on the ground. Tian Bang shook his head from behind as he followed. He didn't say much, but his fist smashed down in the same manner, striking Li Yiwei's chest. Tian Bang's attitude looked quite casual, but the power of his fist's transformation was exquisite to the extreme. The tip of his fist blazed with the format of fire in the beginning, harmonizing with He Yuen's energy. They connected seamlessly, not causing any conflict. Midway, however, it transformed into a thin layer of bloody light. It should be some sort of stimulating secret technique that was forcefully applied to Li Yiwei's body. Looking at the target of this secret technique, it should be the path of the Blood Flame Order. Two apex burners worked together to save Li Yiwei's life. Their reaction speed and level of tacit understanding far surpassed everyone else present. Bamboo Pole and Zhang Yingying reacted as well. They contacted the hospital, allowing their medical personnel to quickly arrive. Luo Nan stared fixedly at the busy scene in front of him. He didn't say a word or move. Luo Nan had a complete grasp of the changes within Li Yiwei's body through the virtual brain system the moment this unforeseen event occurred. He knew the root cause of all this, but this didn't mean that he was able to interfere and reverse it. He knew the chemical formula of the special substance that had already spread throughout Li Yiwei's body, but he didn't understand why such an intense and fatal reaction would occur with the parasitic monster, let alone a solution. In terms of pure adaptability, there was an enormous disparity between him and these two professionals. Luo Nan didn't have the time to feel ashamed. The thoughts in his mind revolved completely around the self-destruct program. They spun crazily, forming a clamorous maelstrom. In his perception domain, the part of the virtual brain interface changed rapidly and directly. The elemental analysis interface of the night-level basic biochemical reactor had already turned to ash. Any loading progress was meaningless. Another 2 seconds passed, and this new element, which had just been incorporated into the virtual brain system not too long ago, completely disappeared. All it left behind was a rather sarcastic system message. The self-destruct program has been successfully rebooted. The biochemical contamination crisis has been resolved. Luo Nan still didn't understand why the self-destruct program had inexplicably rebooted. For the time being, he didn't want to waste his brain power to ponder over these details. He just came to a realization. No wonder the manipulator behind the scenes allowed the parasitic monster to wantonly gather the required substance. The manipulator didn't feel that the method of warping and changing the host's blood vessels, nerves, and hair was sufficiently hidden. Instead, there was a ruthless and decisive method to cover it up. With Li Yiwei's current situation, her nervous system and blood circulation system had suffered fatal damage. Even if the manipulator used every method possible to preserve her life, it would be very difficult to restore her brain structure, which was already in a complete mess. Even if a miracle occurred and some of her consciousness was preserved, it would be impossible to dig out secrets that she didn't know. From the manipulator behind the scenes, this was a near-perfect silencing attempt. The manipulator had considered the relevant circumstances from the very beginning, and it had done a complete program design. Luo Nan felt stifled to the point where his heart ached. If the manipulator really was like Luo Yuan back then, using the mutant lair and the planar crossbow as the foundation to carry out a heaven-shaking, forceful slaughter, then Luo Nan would have accepted it. But what the hell was going on? He couldn't accept this result, and he especially couldn't swallow this bitter fruit. He had to do something. He had to do something no matter what. Luo Nan pursed his lips, suddenly turned around, and walked out of the treatment room with large strides. Lawyer Zhu barked as soon as he opened the door. He couldn't touch Luo Nan with Qin Yikuan and Gao De blocking him, but there was no need for him to. Lawyer Zhu's face contorted from extreme excitement. This is your verification. A terrible design, a terrible program, a terrible result. I've already recorded everything. I'll be sending it to the security department immediately. You guys have the authority, right? This is dereliction of duty, a crime. Yuan stopped what she was doing when she noticed the situation. She walked over with quick steps, and someone else spoke up at this time. Mr. Luo and Vice President He. You guys must give us an explanation. The surprise on Hu Yuli's face hadn't faded yet, but he had already suppressed the fluctuations of his emotions and seized the high ground. Perhaps the people present were lacking in talents who could truly accomplish things, but no one was an idiot. Aside from Sun Jiai, who stood to the side with her arms crossed and the cold eyes of a bystander, the others scrambled to express their dissatisfaction for a time. What did you guys do to Mrs. Li? You directly knocked her down. We just said that this is a danger zone and you guys pushed her in. What do you have to say now? It doesn't matter if Mrs. Li Yiwei is a suspect or not. Is this how you treat suspects? I just heard Mrs. Li's words. You guys did something to her. Willful and reckless. Do whatever you want. Buzzing noises arose, seeming to be endless. It thwarted the emotions and willpower of the people. Yuan didn't speak for the time being. She didn't care how these people tossed and turned. She just went to look at Luonan's situation. Luonan's head was slightly lowered. His face just happened to be hidden in the shadow behind God's shoulder. It was impossible to see what he looked like. Yuan's brows furrowed. She was just about to control the situation when her body suddenly trembled. Crack, crack. It was as if thunder had exploded beside her ears, giving rise to countless cries of alarm. And at the same time, the lights in this area flickered and then turned completely dark. Even the surrounding emergency lights weren't able to be turned on. The darkness caused the cries of alarm to rapidly magnify. Even the sound of thunder was suppressed. But upon closer inspection, where was the sound of thunder? The air was completely filled with chaotic and disorderly sound waves. Not a single wave possessed the corresponding tension. Only Yuan and the other ability users knew that their ears and eyes were in such disarray. There was never any sound of thunder. There was only that explosive attack on the mental plane. The electrical system recovered quickly from the chaos, but when the lights lit up one after another, a wave of startled cries arose. Under the illumination of the lights, the glass walls of the isolation treatment room and the corridor were covered with spiderweb-like crack. It was as if someone had used a giant hammer to smash them a dozen times in the short period of darkness. The direct destructive power had created a direct oppressive force. All noises were erased from the corridor outside the treatment room. The group of people were deathly silent. A rotten pillow stuffed with grass stalks and feathers would still hurt when smashed into the face. Then it would be better to just shatter it. Luonan didn't say a word. He pushed aside Qin Yikuan in front of him and directly left. The surrounding air was clearly warping around his body. Upon closer inspection, it was the phenomenon of water vapor abnormally gathering and refracting light. To be more specific, it was the aftermath of a terrifying soul strength using Luonan's fleshly body as a medium to forcefully interfere with the material plane. The people present might not necessarily be able to understand the problem of supernatural powers, but they all knew where the silent thunder came from when they saw this scene. But so what if they knew? From beginning to end, Luonan's gaze didn't glance at their faces, not even a sliver. But there was clearly a malevolent and terrifying demon within the warped air. It transformed and morphed, seeming as if it could penetrate into their hearts at any time. This is a threat. A gangster-like threat. Lawyer Zhu relied on his overly excited mental state to be the first to break the silence. But he didn't know that his voice was like a chick that had just been cut with a knife. It was crackling with noise. Chapter 672. In a certain room on the 177th floor of Aurora Cloud City. A few seconds ago, the power supply system was inexplicably unstable. The lights flickered, and a fine crackling sound could be heard in the air. It was as if small bubbles were popping one by one. Soon, the illusory barrier erected within the room really did shatter. The two priests of the Order of Justice suddenly stood up, and the Ablatum Knights standing guard outside the door charged in with nervous expressions. They thought that some unforeseen event had occurred within the room. The two sides looked at each other in dismay. 2 seconds passed, and Li Taixing's face turned ashen. He shouted into the air, "Luo Nan, what the hell are you doing?" These words came without rhyme or reason, but everyone present was an ability user. They could all understand what he meant. Right now, the area was pervaded with thundercloud-like soul strength. It formed an incorporeal oppressive force. It was like lightning and fire that could tear apart the void at any time. It was on the verge of erupting, only flickering behind the clouds. However, it could take lives at any time. It truly made one's nerves taut. There weren't many people in Xia City who could create such a scene. Forget it. This was all nonsense. The person over there was clearly displaying the characteristics of his aura. It was absolutely Luo Nan, who they had just met tonight. There was no doubt about it. Li Taixing had just been discussing with Zheng Xiao how to get rid of this fellow, who threatened the foundation of the Order of Justice. He could not help but be nervous when he suddenly encountered such a situation. He thought that the matter had been exposed, and that person had come to kill them. However, there was no reply for a long time after he shouted. This was quite awkward. Zheng Xiao, who was beside Luo Nan, had an additional thought. He felt that the thundercloud on the mental plane had an oppressive range that was a bit too broad, and it lacked a bit of a target. Investigate what's going on. People of their level never lacked information channels. Plus, the Order of Justice had operated in Xia City for several decades. It was not for naught. Even though the Xia City branch and the military and political departments were still working on secrecy, Luo Nan's 2-hour itinerary was displayed before their eyes in a few short minutes. In other words, that person also, wants to vent? Soon, Li Taixing and Zheng Xiao knew the ins and outs of the matter. Actually, it was not complicated. It was just a young man who wanted to resolve his frustrations after encountering a setback. Other people would curse and swear, but he would directly sweep them on the mental plane. In other words, the mental thundercloud that was still surging in the surroundings was not targeted by Luo Nan? This made things even more awkward. After figuring it out, Li Taixing's face alternated between red and white. Upon seeing this, Zheng Xiao hurriedly dismissed the Ablatum Knights from the room. When he turned his head and saw that Li Taixing wanted to say something out of anger again, he quickly gestured to stop him. He pointed at his wristband and sent a message through the internal encrypted channel. Luo Nan is venting his anger after losing face. Let's just watch the fun. There's no need to divert the pressure for the sake of some unrelated people. Furthermore, with this node and this plan, we have to be careful. The color on Li Taixing's face wouldn't disappear for a while. He knew that Zheng Xiao was speaking the truth. When faced with a master of perception who could let go of himself, within the range of his mental perception, it was best to be more cautious if he didn't want to be stripped naked. But he also knew that he was still King Coward. He was a dignified first ablatum of the Order of Justice, yet he was being forced to use a secret channel while speaking in his own room. Wouldn't he become a huge joke if word of this got out? Li Taixing had always been a proud and arrogant person. The negotiations that he had deliberately messed up in the past few years were probably more than the deals that others had made in their entire lives. The reasoning was reasonable, but he was unable to swallow this anger. Zheng Xiao could see that Li Taixing was a bit mentally unbalanced right now. Half of it was because he had lost face due to his earlier misjudgment. Half of it was because he was being suppressed to the point of being sullen. In the end, it was because of the continuous oppressive effects of the thundercloud on the mental plane. We've been talking for quite some time now. Why doesn't Luonan stop? Jing Xiao grasped the most essential problem. The oppressive power of the formless and soundless thundercloud might have been a bit lower than before, but it lingered in the void from beginning to end. It maintained a faintly discernible interference with the material plane. Not just ability users like them, but even some normal people who were more sensitive would have their minds stifled at this time. Their breaths would be uneven. Was this kid crazy? Moreover, this was an enormous consumption. Jing Xiao attempted to make a quantitative analysis. We can feel it even from here. I'm afraid that the entire aurora cloud has been enveloped by it. Li Taixing did not respond, but the calculations in his mind never stopped. He speculated that his strength among the group of first oblatums of the Order of Justice could not compare to the several powerful extraordinaries, but he was still in the upper echelons. He was a B-rank psychic, and he had the blessing of the Order's system. He could go anywhere in the world. However, if he were to be placed in Luonan's current position and learn from Luonan, he would not even be able to expand the range of his perception, let alone exert pressure on the material plane. Was Luonan, this fellow, really someone who was born with knowledge? Or did the original version of formatting theory possess unimaginable advantages? Or perhaps the gate of truth? While Li Taixing's mind was in a mess, Zheng Zhao's quantitative analysis process was delayed after he integrated the information from all sides. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. First oblatumly, according to the latest intelligence, it's not just Aurora Cloud City. I'm afraid the entire Cloud City Water Village area has been affected. What do you mean? Up until now, there have been large-scale failures in the power and wireless communications of this area. It's said that the electromagnetic radiation has exceeded the limit. But the source of the radiation, I think it should be. Zheng Xiao did not finish speaking, and Li Taixing did not rush him. He actually did not speak for a few seconds. Li Taixing was silent for a long time before he simply took action himself. He used the secret technique of the Order of Justice to probe and grasp the current situation of the surrounding area. Zheng Xiao silently assisted him. The results of the measurement on the mental plane needed to be determined and grasped by Luonan himself. Zheng Xiao did not know what Li Taixing's conclusion was. His own opinion was, the hearts of men wavered. There was an emotion known as fear that was slowly but continuously growing in the area that he could sense. He was unable to grasp the finer details, but the general nature was like the silent and overflowing lake water under the autumn rain. It really was lake water. Zheng Xiao pinched his eyebrows. This was like a giant beast suddenly appearing on the calm and tranquil surface of a lake, bringing with it raging waves. Even if the beast quickly dived back down and the surface of the lake recovered its tranquility, the lake water would no longer give off the same feeling as before. In the past, many people did not know what Luonan, a master of perception, could do. Luonan appeared more as a theorist. But from this New Year's Eve onward, everyone had to revise their impressions. They had to consider how the existence of Luonan would affect their past habit. I will contact the first oblatum and ask for guidance on the next step. Li Taixing spoke in the secret channel. It was practically the same as pushing aside his previous considerations and starting all over again. Zheng Xiao lowered his eyebrows and responded in a low voice. There was no doubt that Li Taixing's actions were the triumph of reason over emotion. But looking at it from another angle, wasn't it the triumph of fear over dignity? Perhaps from this moment on, the various powers on Earth would have no choice but to treat the giant beast hidden under the water as one of the greatest variables and incorporate it into their models. While the two first oblatums of the Order of Justice were having a nervous breakdown from the underwater giant beast, the giant beast was sitting behind the office desk with his elbows propped up on his elbows. Luonan began to get used to this posture. His 10 fingers were crossed, and his mouth and nose were covered. Only half of his face could be seen. His eyelids were drooping, and his face was expressionless. He could block off many external spying and observation. He maintained his silence. He did not speak nor move. But the distorted rays of light around his body made this silence not very convincing. No one knew what Luo Nan's intentions were in the end. Bamboo Pole and Zhang Yingying were the first to chase after Luo Nan, but they were pushed outside by the low pressure in the room. He Yuan hurried over after dealing with the relevant matters. And at this time, intelligence from all directions of Cloud City Water Village came flying in like snowflakes, piling up layer upon layer. This description was extremely appropriate. Not only was the amount of intelligence, but it was highly homogeneous. All of it was related to a certain person's intense venting. By the time the Psychic Wave Network Technical Maintenance Team had sent an inquiry and provided a series of data on the decline of the interference rate of the Psychic Wave Network, the situation was already on the verge of spiraling out of control. Zhang Yingying and Bamboo Pole looked at each other in dismay. On one hand, they didn't know how to mediate the situation. On the other hand, they were thoroughly frightened by the terrifying power that Luo Nan displayed. He Yuan spoke softly at this time, "Everyone, don't wait here. Let him calm down." Although the plan failed, the opponent was forced to be ruthless and cut off the relevant clues. This proves that the direction is correct. Whether or not there is proof is no longer important. Bamboo Pole chuckled twice. "Isn't it good for you to speak so bluntly? The path of diplomacy has always been like this. Frankly speaking, this kind of result makes me breathe a sigh of relief." Right now, the opponent isn't prepared, and we aren't prepared either. If we really were to break through the secret like a hot knife through butter and shed all pretenses of cordiality with the opponent, I'm afraid that President Ouyang and Her Majesty Empress Wu would think twice. In terms of pure negotiation, we are undoubtedly the ones with the initiative. Luo Nan obviously heard He Yuan's voice from outside. Nominally, He Yuan was discussing with Bamboo Pole and Zhang Yingying, but Luo Nan was very clear about her actual intentions. But he still didn't react. He just sat quietly behind the office desk until He Yuan sent Bamboo Pole and Zhang Yingying away. She herself also quietly left, leaving only Qin Yikuan and Gao De to guard the door. Only now did Luo Nan loosen his fingers. His mouth and nose felt a bit hot. Traces of blood seeped out from his nostrils. He casually pulled out a tissue and wiped it away. The round of explosion just now had forcefully interfered with the material plane with his soul strength. The god gear and the body gear fiercely rubbed against each other, to the point that some tiny blood vessels were unable to withstand the powerful pressure. They ruptured and bled. But this was nothing. In the few seconds of explosion just now, the power radiation of the interference force definitely exceeded 20 kilowatts. In fact, Luo Nan didn't have enough confidence in his modified structure. For the sake of guaranteeing the radiation power, the output was probably over 10 times greater. Even now, he maintained a power output of 20 kilowatts, allowing the interference wave formed by him and the external neuron to cross a distance of 2,000 kilometers under the guidance of the soul cloak in an attempt to connect with the target. Chapter 673. The propagation speed of interference waves in the air was much slower than electromagnetic waves, but it was much faster than sound waves. With the addition of the soul cloak, it would take around 20 minutes to reach Spring City, 2,000 kilometers away. Luo Nan grasped the propagation process of the interference waves at all times. He also monitored the latest situation in the target area where they were about to arrive. The grand parade in Spring City was still in progress. However, the mentally and physically exhausted heroes were all transferred to the Medical Research Center after a brief welcome ceremony to carry out the next step of treatment. Currently, the transfer and placement work was underway. The Medical Research Center was bustling inside and out, and Luo Nan's locked onto target had just finished resuscitation work for the patient. He was currently attempting to transfer, between various treatment groups to proceed with the next step of data collection and storage. However, the research center had strict isolation measures, so this was bound to be a long process. At the very least, the chances of this happening tonight weren't high. Luonan wasn't prepared to interfere with the enemy's rhythm for now. He just focused on his own matters. After staying in the office for a few minutes, the interference waves crossed a distance of 2,000 kilometers to arrive at the target area. Luonan needed to place additional constraints on the interference wave conduction in order to reduce the mutual influence with the external environment. He needed to increase the intensity locally and attempt to connect with the target. This consumed a bit of time, but it went relatively smoothly overall. Luonan controlled the interference waves to penetrate the surface of the target's body while the target was completely unaware. He hooked up with the sarcoma growing within the womb and docked with it. The interference waves were a one-way transmission. There was no need to consider how to feed back information because the simple transmission of information was no longer limited to the form of limited wave. Luonan had 100 ways to receive information within the area covered by the soul cloak and decipher it with 1,000 times the efficiency. The virtual brain interface only had a delay of a dozen or so milliseconds. Then the analysis window of the night-level colonization basic biochemical reactor reappeared. Of course, the processes and functions that had been loaded previously needed to be redone. Luonan didn't mind this. He just cared about whether or not he could make up for his own mistake. He would be more cautious and patient for this. As Wayne said, it was a good thing that the enemy was unprepared, but it wasn't smart to blindly charge in and attack without making any preparations. He couldn't fall into the same pit twice. Reality proved that the effects of the interference waves and the virtual brain system's analysis were not within the self-destruct mode conditions set by the enemy. The enemy wasn't aware of it, and with the self-destruction of Li Yiwei's line, their operations in Xia City would be more or less affected. In this way, Luonan would be able to gradually accumulate capital before the enemy became aware of this. He would be able to scout for information during this period of time before the enemy made a new round of movement. He would be able to make more targeted arrangements and try to seize an opportunity where the enemy wouldn't be able to retaliate. This was Luonan's general train of thought, but Chernlai was not clear on the specific details yet. He needed to continue making adjustments. 2,000 kilometers away, however, the system's information regarding the reaction furnace continued to refresh. One of the more crucial data was, of course, the ratio of the raw materials for the breeding room's advanced formula. There were two types of this ratio. One was the collection results of the reactor itself. Luonan still remembered that Li Yiwei was at 17%, but this reaction furnace had already reached over 20%. Close to 1% of this was tonight's performance. The other was the theoretical value of global raw materials set by the virtual brain system according to Luonan's mental sensing ability. With this reactor as the base, the value reached about 23%, which was also 2% higher than Li Yiwei's reactor. After careful comparison, one could see that the raw materials collected for the two reaction furnaces were similar, but there were also quite a few differences. There were 4 types of chemical compounds and trace elements that were unique to the reactor within Li Yiwei's body. Moreover, they were extremely rare on this planet. These raw materials had already been destroyed or contaminated following the restart of the self-destruct program. If Luonan were to collect once more, he would really be tossed around according to his previous speed. The manipulator behind the scenes would probably feel heartache. However, this was nothing to be happy about. All in all, the results of Spring City's collection and storage were complete victories. And this was inseparable from the existence of the infected mutated people in Spring City. If Luonan's guess was correct, then the raw material output speed would inevitably soar for a period of time in the future. Such an increase was undoubtedly the scene that the manipulator behind the scenes wanted to see the most. If a dozen infected people can have such an immediate effect, then what would happen if there were tens of thousands of infected people? Luonan would most likely be moved by placing Luonan in the position of the manipulator behind the scenes. Luonan thought about the 13,000 latent infected people in Xia City and then expanded this situation to the entire world. Perhaps the manipulator behind the scenes was the master of a plantation. He was fervently looking forward to the scattered seeds taking root and germinating, blossoming all over the world. It was precisely because of these thoughts that Luonan held a certain reservation toward the information and analysis provided by Peony. Perhaps the cause and trend were correct, but the patience of humans was often untrustworthy in the face of easily obtainable results. Just like Luonan from 20 minutes ago. Patience. Patience. Luonan pondered for a long time before finally making a decision. He sent a message on the mental plane. Ray 1, you've been out for a bit too long. First accompany Aunt and the others home. You take the seed first. If there's a need, you can go on a business trip at any time. This time, we won't waste this opportunity. Okay. Rue 1, who had been hiding to the side all this time, responded. Then she left from the shadows. Luonan decided not to let Jean Tong's soul light seed come into contact with the wreckage of the reactor for the time being. He would consider it after observing it for a period of time. The enemy's preset self-destruct mechanism made him feel a lingering fear. It would be best to design an opportunity. Head design. Even a cooked duck could self-destruct. The manipulator behind the scenes was indeed an expert in this field. It gave Luonan a resounding slap to the face. Luonan always felt that his brain wasn't enough to deal with these crafty old foxes. His level was far too low in this aspect. But this involved important privacy, and it wasn't convenient for him to discuss it with He Yuan and the others. One man is better than two. This shortcoming wouldn't grow in a short amount of time. Luonan had used too much of his brain power at this point. His thoughts were a bit scattered. Many thoughts flashed back and forth, unable to settle down. He stared blankly for a few more minutes before he suddenly thought of something. Oh right. The self-destructing reactor in Li Yiwei's womb couldn't be abandoned. It needed to be dissected as well. It was possible to restore its internal structure, and it would be convenient for the virtual brain system to conduct a deeper exploration. Luonan believed that He Yuan wouldn't overlook this arrangement, but he still prepared to mention it in the mission channel. Right when he was about to speak, the message in the channel refreshed. Great Sage Luo, hurry up and retract your powers. Octopus and Zhang Yingying both had puzzled expressions in the mission channel. They were supporting Bamboo Pole. Boss Luo is a great talent. Bamboo Pole spoke for the second time, but he was different from before. He sang a song of praise without any bottom line. This move, dark cloud overhead, has truly reached the heavens. Please look at the results below with respect, everyone. Bamboo Pole sent in a large screenshot of the message as he spoke. The format seemed to have been forcefully hacked out of some system's backend. This was indeed the case. Due to Boss Luo's tyrannical methods, there are quite a few problems with normal communications in the vicinity of the large living area. Some people have no choice but to use abnormal methods of communication. This will expose them even faster. This gave Bamboo Pole a chance to display his talent. He seized the opportunity to hack into the confidential channel and pluck out a large amount of relevant information. The most eye-catching among them was an urgent notification. The project has been temporarily suspended. From now on, relevant personnel are not allowed to use conversational methods to discuss the project in any public or private settings. If communication is necessary, it can be done through the internet or SMS. But please note that external visualization tools are not to be used. Try to use retinal projection as much as possible. From now on, when project information is involved in the Xia City region, this confidentiality requirement must be strictly enforced. Looking at the system time, The message was sent 19 minutes ago. In other words, not long after Luonan's silent thundercloud covered the large living area, this message was sent out. The other party's reaction. Yes, it was quite intense. The true path is the eye. Bamboo Pole exclaimed loudly in admiration. He was in the standard state of a fanatic. Oh, for the time being, he was exclaiming in admiration. Zhang Yingying replied with a classic dumbstruck dog emoji. On the other side, Octopus couldn't help but speak in the channel. This should be a warning to the investors and participants of the project. Isn't sending this message enough to make the atmosphere tense? Are the people who made this decision stupid? Well said. Let's look at the next message. Under Bamboo Pole's prompt, everyone noticed that not even 2 minutes after the last message was sent, the same sender sent out another notification. The tone of the message was quite a bit gentler, and it mentioned something like a briefing. It was clear with a glance that they were doing their best to save the tense atmosphere from before. But it was already too late. According to Bamboo Pole, after the first message was sent out, this secret channel instantly carried 10 times the normal amount of communication. Large amounts of questioning and doubtful information swarmed over like a swarm of bees. And because of this abnormal movement attracted Bamboo Pole's attention. He had a nest of information on the entire channel, and he was still closely monitoring it right now. I was just worried that the next clue wasn't enough, but now I've exploded into a nest. I'm embarrassed to eat over here. Thank you, Boss Luo. This move is truly beautiful. Luonan was speechless. What did he do? Chapter 674. Qin Yikuan and Gao De were undoubtedly devoted to their duties as Luonan's 2 bodyguards. They had a clear division of labor. God stood outside the office, acting as a door god. Qin Yikuan, on the other hand, was in an inconspicuous corner of the office, guarding close to prevent any strong enemies from sneaking in and assassinating him. To be honest, Qin Yikuan felt a little out of sorts tonight. He felt a little uneasy standing in the house. It was as if there was something else nearby. He had already confirmed with God many times, but the 2 of them did not find anything. This made them even more nervous. At that moment, he noticed Bamboo Pole's words in the mission channel. For a moment, he felt a pang in his heart. Perhaps the previous scene was an illusion caused by Luo Dashing's silent thundercloud? They clearly knew that the thundercloud in the surrounding void was brought forth by Luonan, and that it bore no malice towards them. However, if one were to remain in it for a long period of time, the most important senses of a martial artist would be suppressed and affected to varying degrees. In particular, they were all responsible for their duties and needed to be fully focused. Thus, they were even more sensitive to this influence. It was to the point that when the room was extremely quiet, hearing their own breathing was like hearing the aftermath of distant thunder, gradually entering their souls and causing them to tremble. Bamboo Pole asked Luonan to withdraw his powers. Qin Yikuan was undoubtedly relieved. But Luonan's response was actually this several seconds later. Wait a little longer. In the mission channel, Bamboo Pole sent a question mark emoji. And on the plane of reality, Qin Yikuan looked over in astonishment. Luonan's reaction was a bit out of line with his usual personality. Behind the office desk, Luonan's elbows were still propped on the surface of the desk. His posture had practically never changed, and he looked to be in a daze from beginning to end. And Qin Yikuan held a certain amount of reverence towards this state. Perhaps Luonan was lacking in the way he conducted himself, but Luonan possessed a completely different logic of thought from ordinary people. The longer Qin Yikuan interacted with Luonan, the more Qin Yikuan was able to understand the depth and breadth of Luonan's thoughts. Especially right now. Luonan was surrounded by the boundless thundercloud. The power of thought transformed into a concrete and perceptible pressure. There was even a heavy dignity to it, causing Qin Yikuan to subconsciously hold his breath to avoid affecting Luonan's train of thought. An unknown amount of time passed before Luonan, who was sitting at the desk, slightly raised his head. His gaze seemed to be cast towards the ceiling, but it was unknown what he was looking at. This continued for a few seconds before Luonan suddenly pushed the table away. "Boss?" Chin Ikuan asked. "The house is too small. I want to go out for a walk." Where?" "Let's go to the rooftop. We can see the rooftop of the North Shore's gear. There are more people at this time, but we can always find a quieter place." When he came out of the police office, it was already the wee hours of 2097. Since it was New Year's Eve, it was the busiest time. None of the elevators were in place, so they could only wait. "I still need around a minute and 10 seconds. Luonan raised his eyes and made a judgment. He knew the exact location and operating speed of each of the elevators. He also knew if there were people waiting or going to wait on each floor. Through this design and a simple model, he could roughly calculate when the nearest elevator would arrive. Then Luonan had no choice but to revise his answer half a minute later. The reason was that after the target elevator stopped on a certain floor, a passenger had purposely blocked the elevator door in order to speak to his friend in the car. Naturally, the previous outcome would be nullified. "I still need to wait another 50 seconds. Sure enough, the greatest variable is still the human. But is he really a variable?" Luonan unwittingly entered the stage of talking to himself. Chin Ikuan and God looked at each other speechlessly. Luonan had a bit of a train of thought, but it wasn't too clear. His gaze seemed to stare fixedly at the elevator door, but in reality, what he was looking at was the fluttering grass stalks and feathers that filled the sky. It was the hearts of the people in and around the large living area that were panicking and restless because of the soundless thundercloud. It was because he wanted to see these that he refused Bamboo Pole's suggestion. The interference waves were already in place, but he still maintained the tyrannical and crude mental interference of the surrounding area. He sat and watched as the turbid flow of the people's negative emotions continued to overflow. The round headlamp above lit up, and the elevator door opened with a jingle. 7 or 8 people walked out. God's large body blocked in front of Luonan, passing by these people. There were no threatening targets inside. Everything was calm and tranquil. Luonan walked into the car, but then he heard someone call out softly from behind, "Mr. Luo?" Luonan turned his head and saw a rather tall and beautiful young woman within the stream of people that had just walked out of the elevator. She was currently bowing to him in greeting. Her body movements were very restrained, and her smile was polite and carried an appropriate amount of respect. It was very much in line with the ladylike style dress she wore. "Oh, Yuqin?" Luonan didn't forget this name. Yuqin was the daughter of a certain pharmaceutical company. Her older brother, Yu Jing, had once clashed with Luonan, but Yuqin's calm and intelligent personality made it hard for people to dislike her. She had always been trying to mend her relationship with Luonan, especially since she was the best friend of Luonan's older cousin, Emohan, and the doll of the BHD trio, Bai. She was also Luonan's schoolmate when he was at 6th High. Luonan hadn't seen Yuqin ever since the incident at the municipal plaza. She would occasionally send messages online to greet him, but they never went too far. They had always maintained contact. Seeing Luonan give a response, Chin Ikuan reached out his hand to block the elevator door, allowing them to speak. Yuqin's dimples suddenly blossomed on the other side. Her polite attitude was quite a bit more intimate. "Happy New Year, Mr. Luo." Happy New Year." Strangely enough, on this New Year's Eve, Yuqin was actually the first person to say these words to him. Luonan's friends and family had their own chat group. It was bustling, but Luonan didn't open it. His aunt, uncle, and the others who were closer to him most likely didn't contact him in consideration of his mysterious operation tonight. As for his inner world circle, everyone was as busy as a dog. They didn't remember this sort of boring matter. Alright, though it was boring, it was pretty good to hear this sound. Yuqin walked a few steps over, stopping only when she reached Chin Ikuan's side. Her gaze shifted slightly towards Gouda, and she nodded in greeting. I felt that Captain Gao looked familiar just now. Then I saw you, Mr. Luo. Otherwise, I would have missed you. Do you guys still want to go up? Indeed, Yuqin and Gouda had met face to face during the incident at the municipal plaza. Gouda had indeed appeared with the identity of the building's security captain. Luonan had clearly only met once, but he was able to completely remember a person's surname and job title. Luonan probably wouldn't be able to successfully cultivate this skill in this lifetime. However, as Yuqin spoke, Luonan noticed that there was a middle-aged man and woman behind her casting their gazes in this direction. Judging from their age and appearance, they seemed to be her parents. They should be on a family trip, but her older brother wasn't here. This sort of hidden social situation was one of Luonan's biggest headaches. He simply acted as if he didn't see it. He just responded dryly, "I have a bit of business." Yuqin's gaze shot a glance at his wrist. She saw Luonan's exposed wristband dial, and she was a bit stunned. Then she bit her lower lip, raised her hand in front of her chest, and made a pleading gesture. Her voice dropped an octave. "Mr. Luo, my older brother is also up there. He's with a friend. If you run into him and act foolishly again, please don't bicker with him. Please." As a reserved and introverted beauty, Yuqin was always able to put on a noble and proper posture. And it was because of this that her pleading appearance was all the more moving. Luonan had to admit that seeing this scene really made his heart happy. But in the end, he just said, "Oh." He didn't give a clear answer. On one hand, he didn't know how to respond properly. On the other hand, he could feel a clear change in the mood of someone in this area. His gaze went over Yuqin's shoulder and swept over the body of the middle-aged man behind her. Perhaps the middle-aged man had drunk a bit of alcohol. His breathing was a bit hurried. Right now his body was half-turned, seeming to be controlling his breath. In fact, his gaze had been constantly glancing over. Luonan's gaze cut over at this time, and the two sides inevitably collided. The middle-aged man's body clearly trembled at this moment. The body language he displayed did not match his status. Luonan withdrew his gaze and immediately asked, "Your father?" Yuqin was a bit startled. She subconsciously turned her head to look, and her heart thumped. Luonan indicated to Qin Ikuan that he could enter the elevator during this gap. He also decided to stop the current conversation. "Let's not chat anymore. It's getting late. Pay attention to your safety when you go home." He pressed the button for the floor as he spoke. He nodded towards the stupefied Yuqin before the elevator door closed. His gaze swept over the middle-aged man behind her once more. The closed elevator door divided their visions. Luonan's eyelids drooped, and he stood there silently. Qin Ikuan couldn't help but ask, "Is there anything wrong with that family?" Luonan didn't answer immediately. He just continued to retract and focus his incomparably enormous sensory network. Soon, he locked onto his target in a certain location within Aurora Cloud City. Luonan barely remembered Yu Zheng's appearance. After a bit of comparison, Luonan was able to confirm that it was Yu Zheng. He was one of the 22 Phase 2 aberration infection targets that had been put on record. Yu Zheng's internal number was 14. He had been too focused on the big picture to notice this small detail. Luonan shook his head and directly spoke in the mission channel. "Brother Bamboo Pole, infected person number 14 is the Yu Zheng I had a dispute with last time at the Frost River Waterway flagship store." His father. Bamboo Pole immediately sent a message. "Yu Qi, chairman and major shareholder of Wiyue Pharmaceuticals. Yu Zheng is infected, so Yu Qi must know the inside story. Now that his emotions are unstable, it's likely that he won't be able to hold on much longer. If the branch doesn't want the situation to get out of hand, it's best to control it in advance." Bamboo Pole couldn't react for a moment. Luonan's wristband vibrated at this time. He looked at the caller ID and saw that it was actually Yuqin who had sent a communication request. Luo Nan thought for a moment before accepting the call. Hey, hello. There were clear sounds of breathing on the other side, and there were some noises. The one who spoke in the end wasn't Yuqin, but a low and hoarse male voice. Luo Nan knew that this was Yuqin's father, the Yuqi he had just been discussing. Every word that Yuqi uttered was dry, hoarse, and difficult. Mr. Luo, I want to report something to you. Luo Nan didn't plan on chatting with this person. He simply responded, someone will contact you soon. Do your best for the sake of your children. Chapter 675. The elevator continued to go up, and Luo Nan looked at the jumping numbers on the panel. He suddenly asked, isn't it too easy? Qin Ikuan and God looked at each other. They hesitated for a moment before Qin Ikuan responded, indeed. That person's mind collapsed just like that. Mr. Luo, what did you do just now? Did you apply pressure locally? I didn't do anything, aside from the initial force. My previous plan was easily broken by someone, but now the answer popped out on its own. It was so easy. Why? Qin Ikuan answered cautiously, they're on different levels. The two suspects are both very powerful powers, and Mr. Yu is just an ordinary person. The so-called suspects were referring to Quantum Corporation and the Gene Exchange. Yuqi, a successful person in society, clearly did not have the qualifications to compare with these two powers. Of course, they're on different levels. Luo Nan acknowledged this prerequisite. But then again, the two Order of Justice First Oblatums on the 177th floor weren't bad either, but they were quite anxious right now. And this was a situation where Luo Nan did not deliberately target them. In Luo Nan's eyes, the large living area was a region where his soul strength tyrannically interfered with. The thoughts, choices, and actions of the vast majority of people suddenly became special. It was simple. Had his eyesight and analysis improved? No. Luo Nan never believed that he had any talent in analyzing situations and peeling silk from cocoons. The reason why he had a feeling of simplicity was undoubtedly because the current situation had inexplicably become direct and clear. Just like the emergency notification that intensified the situation. Just like Yuqi's display of mental defenses collapsing. Luo Nan knew that the most direct reason for this was the silent thundercloud that he had released into the mental domain of others. It was just as Bamboo Pole said. Quite a few of these fellows with ulterior motives had sunk into a state of brain hypoxia under the powerful pressure. They were at a loss of what to do, and most of them relied on their inferior instincts to do all sorts of absurd, ridiculous, and foolish actions. But were the two first oblatums of the Order of Justice suffering from brain hypoxia as well? Clearly not. But their actions were clearly affected, to the point where clear fluctuations appeared in their emotions and mental state. Their mental defenses, which were originally quite strict, silently cracked and cracked, exposing quite a few flaws for Luo Nan to exploit. The series of changes in the state of affairs made Luo Nan feel as if he had gained something. He seemed to have discovered a method, a new model, that was completely different from his previous failed designs. It could make up for, or at least bypass, the shortcomings of his strategic designs. That's right. Luo Nan had been brooding over his failure in the treatment room all this time. Victory had been so close at hand, but it had been forcefully cut off by someone. All of his previous efforts had been wasted. And this was a conditional lock that had been set up early on. It was like a noose waiting for him to obediently step on it. Do you feel like your IQ is being crushed? Therefore, Luo Nan needed to make up for his mistake. Aside from the interference waves that could be transmitted 2,000 kilometers away, he urgently wanted to make corrections to his own behavior. Luo Nan clenched his hand into a fist and lightly smacked his forehead. He tried to sort out the flashing and changing flaming tails of spiritual light in his mind. He wanted to find the most fundamental point of force. The elevator continued to ascend. Luonan knew that this journey would be smoother. As mentioned before, his perception covered the entire building. Under the premise of near omniscience, he could, of course, make predictions. This was Luonan's most accustomed way of thinking. It was also a kind of classic method: observation, generalization, classification, corresponding consideration, and solution. He was used to being an observer. He was able to utilize the mental sensing network very well, maximizing the absorption of information, enriching the conditions, reducing the difficulty of making judgments, and increasing the precision. It was just like doing exercises. He was methodical, obtaining the correct answer. He was as rigorous and thorough as possible. However, errors would always appear. Especially with the expansion of the span of time and space, there would always be such and such accident. Mechanical objects would have conflicts and malfunctions. The ever-changing human heart would always give people surprises. There would be gaps in one's own thinking when there were too many conditions to collect. Of course, he could observe more deeply, calculate more seriously, and expend more energy to reduce errors to the minimum. However, the changes of the world were not like taking the elevator and doing exercises. If he guessed wrong in the elevator, he would at most have to wait a bit longer. The exercises would forever lie in the exercises collection. If he was wrong, he could change it. If he couldn't, he could study it again. Dealing with the affairs of the world involved success and failure, life and death. It involved too many domains that he did not understand and did not delve deeply into. For example, the condition lock this time. The entire biochemical reactor, the design diagram of the parasitic monster, and the anatomical diagram were more or less placed before his eyes, but he still missed the condition lock. Even after the conclusion appeared, he still needed to spend a considerable amount of time to understand and guess. Only then would he be able to understand the mechanism of this ambush. If he were to encounter a similar situation again, would he have to learn and solve the problem step by step? Would he have to find all the conditions, analyze them clearly, establish a model, and verify them one by one? It was impossible. In the end, he wasn't an omniscient and omnipotent God. His mental sensing network and the processing mode of his brain were ultimately unable to encompass the entire world. This was a heavenly road that looked very beautiful, but countless traps and landmines were hidden on the road. The more he went forward, the more beautiful the scenery, but the greater the danger. In that case, was there a method that could effectively reduce the conditions and calculation requirements, allowing him to always be in the domain that he was most proficient in, to handle problems with ease? I have a general idea. Luonan spoke abruptly, causing the two bodyguards beside him to only smile wryly. Luonan asked them a question at this time, say, the 20,000 people of Aurora Cloud City right now. Which direction do you think they will go? What form will they take to leave? Chin-Ikuan looked at God, and God looked at Chin-Ikuan. The two politely pushed and pushed back a few times before Chin-Ikuan replied awkwardly, I can't say for sure. But the method is probably the elevator. Then what will happen if Aurora Cloud City catches fire right now? Chin-Ikuan couldn't continue. He just wanted to ask Boss Luo, what are you doing? Luonan answered his own question. They will certainly call the police and flee. Under the guidance of the fire prevention system, people will no longer take the elevator. They will flee through the fire escape passageway. And if we clearly tell them that there is only one passageway that is unobstructed, then everyone, or at least the majority of people, will rush there. Even the most resolute of fellows will be affected by the surging tide of people. The situation becomes simple. The flow of people and their corresponding variables will be squeezed into a limited area, and it will be easier to take advantage of. Of course, this is just a guess. I haven't verified it yet. Verify your sister. The pressure on Chin-Ikuan and God was like a mountain in an instant. Strands of coldness even seeped out from the back of their neck. It wasn't that they didn't have confidence in Luonan. It was that the young man before them displayed an extremely serious attitude. Truth be told, they really didn't know if Luo Nan, who had been immersed in his own logic, would really go and do a little experiment or something. He didn't even need to move his pinky finger to create a disaster that was 100 times more terrifying than a fire. Luo Nan felt the changes in the moods of the two bodyguards. Yes, this could be considered a sort of verification. When external forces forcefully intervened, even the numerous and complicated human hearts would be dissolved layer by layer. Only a few answers would remain. There were only a few limited, instinctive modes for humans. It was just as Bamboo Pole said. Animalistic nature would dominate everything in the end. Of course, it was impossible to achieve perfection in the vast majority of situations, especially when facing a powerful enemy. But in the end, the train of thought was correct. Limit the domain. Limit the level. Limit the direction. Make things simple. And in order to accomplish all of this, one needed to actively intervene. Engaging in pure observation from beginning to end was a comprehensive, thorough, yet passive method. The sensing network that covered the entire world was just the first step to seize the initiative. Its clairvoyance was only temporary. If Luo Nan still used the thought process of doing exercises to solve practical problems, even if he had the support of the sensing network and was a step, 2, 3, or even 4 steps faster, he would still be in a passive position when competing with those fellows who had been operating for many years and had buried countless traps. The conditional format lock that gave him a hard slap in the face was the best example. Luo Nan's new train of thought was to go from being passive to being active. Then what should he do? What should he do in order to be more proactive in intervening and obtaining the best results? What should he do in order to have an effective effect on an ordinary person like Yu Qi? What should he do in order to have a substantial effect on an elite of the inner world like Li Taixing? Or even on the powerful people hiding behind Quantum Corporation and the Gene Exchange? Luo Nan wanted to continue pondering, but his wristband vibrated at this time, interrupting his train of thought. He glanced at the caller ID, and the corner of his eyes twitched. He Donglu, this playboy. What the hell was he doing getting in on the action? Luo Nan didn't have the leisure to pay attention to this fellow. He simply refused the call and continued to ponder his own matters. He Donglu didn't disturb him any further. The elevator went all the way up, and it was just as Luo Nan had predicted. Practically no one cut in line. The elevator only stopped for the first time when it reached the 160th floor. Luo Nan furrowed his brows, and the smell of alcohol assailed his nostrils as the metal door opened. Surprise! He Donglu leaned against the edge of the elevator and suddenly leaned half his body over. He didn't care what sort of expression Luo Nan had and just laughed loudly. His face was scarlet red, and it was obvious that he was in a drunken state. Luo Nan wasn't scared. He just pondered whether or not he should let Qin Yikuan kick this brother out. And at this time, He Donglu gave him a thumbs up. Boss Luo, I heard that your esteemed self barged into the Caesar Club and kicked the balls of the Huang family's kid. Aha, this terrible party is lacking a man like you. Go go go. Let's go get high together. He slammed his head into the room as he spoke. He wasn't the only one. There were 5 or 6 other drunk men and women behind him. They followed in, laughing and laughing. Qin Yikuan looked at Luo Nan, and Luo Nan didn't have the impatience he had earlier. Instead, it was as if he had discovered something interesting. He sized up these people back and forth. He asked He Donglu, "How did you know I was here?" Chapter 676. Come. Let me introduce you. Everyone here is someone you can make friends with. He Donglu acted as Luo Nan's introducer. He introduced the group of drunkards that came in with him to Luo Nan. Luo Nan didn't recognize these people. He didn't even remember the introductions. In any case, they were the sons and granddaughters of some big shot. He just discovered that He Donglo's official female companion for tonight, the female celebrity Shi Wei, wasn't among them. Of course, these drunkards didn't recognize him. They were all laughing and giggling there. There was a gorgeous woman wearing nightclub makeup who directly reached out to touch Luo Nan's chest. Wow, Donglu, you actually hid such a little brother who abstinence. He didn't bring a female companion or a bodyguard to a party. What kind of business does little boss do? Move to the side. Are you looking for a beating? He Donglu slapped away the nightclub girl's perverted claw without the slightest trace of politeness. But in the blink of an eye, he laughed mischievously. I'm not the one hiding people. It's my older sister. My older sister is Boss Luo's secretary. Your older sister? Which older sister? He Donglu laughed again under Luo Nan's attentive gaze. The He family was a large family. There were 7 or 8 women of suitable age and unsuitable age. This was enough for these drunkards to guess blindly for a while. Actually, under the effects of alcohol and drugs, the logic of these drunkards had long since become dregs. This topic didn't persist for more than 20 seconds. It just stirred the elevator space into a chaotic mess, creating a foul atmosphere. Luo Nan didn't mind this sort of chaos. He watched everything with interest. He could see that this group of people were really relaxed. This seemed quite reasonable. After all, this was a carnival party. But the problem was that being able to be this relaxed in the current Aurora Cloud City, especially in this well-informed second-generation circle, was a very rare type. Rare and good. Luo Nan asked He Donglu, "Your party is on the rooftop? Are there a lot of people?" The rooftop is just one of them. The weather is cold and the earth is frozen. There are also people who like indoor sports. Hey, what do you mean by you? We. He Donglu forcefully corrected Luo Nan's wrong position. He laughed as he grabbed Luo Nan's wrist. He probably wanted to show off the garbled dial on his wristband. But he soon suffered retribution. Luo Nan pulled his hand away in a bad mood. He grimaced in pain. He wasn't annoyed, but laughed and said, "Since you're carrying this thing, you don't have to put up a memorial arch. I'll keep it a secret from my sister. Don't worry. I will introduce them to you. I know what you like. With Shi Wei around, we will know each other very well. It will definitely be safe." As he said that, he even leaned over, his breath reeking of alcohol. He lowered his voice and said mysteriously, "I know you know someone in the circle. Now that things are a mess, you should keep an eye on them. If you run into someone like that Huang brat again, who knows how many balls you'll have to break." He was probably referring to the BHD group or even Moya and the others. Luo Nan understood He Donglo's superficial hint. He could also see the deeper thoughts of this fellow, who was watching a show and didn't mind the matter getting bigger. However, he still spent an extra 2 seconds and carefully observed once more. Only then did he finally confirm that He Donglu truly didn't know what was happening outside. This one was more impressive. It must be known that He Donglu and his group weren't ordinary commoners. This didn't mean that they were more precious than ordinary commoners. Rather, this group of people were undoubtedly in the vicinity of the core circle of tonight's storm. If they were still completely ignorant of the entire situation at this time, then Luo Nan would have to have a whole new level of respect for the ability of the government and the military to keep things secret. Of course, a person involved like Yu Jing would certainly know a bit. Luo Nan wasn't completely clear about the arrangements in the end, nor was he interested. He just felt that this small, temporarily sealed circle was very suitable for him to verify a few things. He Donglu was still pulling and tugging. Luo Nan looked at the jumping number of floors on the elevator panel and suddenly laughed. "Is there a relatively quiet place over there?" "There is. There's too much." He Donglu opened his mouth. "Then let's go. Let's go take a look." A few minutes later, just as Donglu had promised, Luo Nan stood in a relatively quiet place. He looked down from high above, overlooking the entire rooftop. Actually, this place wasn't a part of the rooftop. It was a viewing room adjacent to it. The balcony on this side faced the rooftop directly. The angle and height were excellent. It was indeed the best place in the vicinity to have the best view. One could see the lustrous and dazzling scenery of the rooftop in its entirety. Currently, the rooftop was a rather lively area. There was a half-suspended sky swimming pool at the edge. The swimming pool could have been changed to a sealed structure in this season, but the group of people had requested that the entire swimming pool be exposed to the cold winds of the high altitude. As for the thermostatic system, it didn't exist. At most, it could maintain the level of not freezing the swimming pool. There was a row of swimsuit models lined up neatly by the side of the swimming pool. Each and every one of them had fair skin, long legs, and beautiful looks. But at the same time, their lips had turned blue from the cold. Yet they still had to keep their heads high and their chests out. Their dimples were like flowers. Next to her was a group of multimillionaires who had just lost a bet. They were forced to take off their clothes. They were left with only a pair of underpants. Some of them were even stripped naked. Then they screamed as they hugged a model by the side of the swimming pool. They were smashed into the pool with a splash. When all the models lined up at the edge of the swimming pool were thrown into the water, dozens of black and white flesh wantonly tossed and turned in the pool, moaning and screaming. The victors on the shore clapped their hands in celebration. The atmosphere was noisy, passionate, and absurd. The rooftop was very large. The sky swimming pool was just a corner of it. Needless to say, there were also people who weren't willing to suffer the cold. They were partying in other areas. Generally speaking, the atmosphere Luo Nan felt matched with the situation He Donglu had revealed. Though there were indeed a portion of people who were restless and forced smiles, the overall situation was controllable. Luo Nan really did have a whole new level of respect for the military and the government. You won't be able to feel the atmosphere here. Young people don't need to be shy. You need to know how to blend into the environment. You don't need to worry about my sister. Do you want to drink? He Donglo's words were stuck in his throat after being covered by Luo Nan's gaze. He automatically gave up on the old joke that had been used too many times. He went in dejectedly to fetch some wine. Luo Nan really didn't blend in. He didn't want to blend in. Right now, he was just playing the role of an observer. He carried out transcendental clairvoyance from a transcendent position. It seemed that he had returned to his old path of pure observation. This didn't conform to Luo Nan's previous awareness, but it was more in line with the general environment of Xia City. One fact was obvious. A better effect of secrecy represented a higher cost of secrecy. This was more proof of the resolute determination of Xia City's administration to maintain stability. There was also the Xia City branch. From the beginning of the incident until now, especially He Yuan's behavior of concealing over 10,000 suspected cases, Luo Nan couldn't deny that there was a consistent, low-key core within, even if he had the intention of fishing. Whether it was to maintain stability or to keep a low profile, to put it bluntly, it was to control the situation and handle things cautiously. No one was willing to blow things up. Perhaps it was just as Peony said. This was already a general trend that was moving toward political correctness. Prematurely handling things was tantamount to standing on the sidelines. It was very easy to fall into a dilemma. Some of these principles were Luo Nan's speculations, but most of them came from Bamboo Pole and the others in the Mission Channel, discussing and speaking over and over again. Luo Nan didn't really participate, but this kind of discussion was brainwashing. It was specifically designed to wash Boss Luo's brain. The silent thundercloud just now had left the administrators, who had been deliberately keeping a low profile and maintaining stability, in a very difficult situation. But now they could die in peace. Luo Nan had already stopped the silent thundercloud's oppressive posture. But if one were to insist on saying that Luo Nan cared about the overall situation, that might not be the case. From Luo Nan's own point of view, he just carried out a more technical reflection. The powerful oppression of the silent thundercloud created an effect similar to the brainless halo. It was far too crude on a technical level. Ordinary people like Yuchi nearly lost control of their emotions. It didn't mean much to the truly strong. At the very least, Luonan didn't see any extraordinary jump up and down. Luonan's elbows pressed against the stone wall of the balcony as he gazed at the chaotic scene on the rooftop below. These people had their nerves numbed by alcohol and drugs. They were the few targets in the vicinity that weren't affected by the silent thundercloud. They were excellent test subjects. Luonan hoped to find an answer from their bodies. Was there a highly efficient structure and a corresponding entry point? Was there a way to turn one part of intervention into 10 parts of effectiveness? There was no doubt that Luonan's way of thinking was a type of configuration thinking. He naturally flipped through the virtual brain system's user manual, searching for an answer in this configuration dictionary. Of course, he also had his mother's research materials. But those materials leaned more towards basic designs and fragments. They weren't as mature and complete as the user manual. They could be directly used as examples. But this time, Luonan was disappointed. He flipped through the user manual, but he actually didn't find a single configuration example that was related to his current situation and requirement. Instead, there were quite a few related structures that could be used to break and reconstruct this negative aura. This didn't make sense. Luonan searched 2 times. In the end, he even flipped through the catalog bit by bit, but he didn't find anything. But half a month ago in class, when he first taught the blood intent ring, he also played around with the collective will. Oh, hold on. Luonan suddenly came to a realization. It didn't matter how he stirred the hearts of the people during the lecture. His ultimate goal was to eliminate all irrelevant disturbances and gather everyone's minds. He completed the process of accumulating the basic structure of the arc wedge from simple to complex. Finally, he built the fortress of the blood intent ring. That entire process could be said to be the gathering of everyone's wisdom. They eliminated all irrelevant emotional influences. It was a display of rationality. It was very different from the situation under the soundless thundercloud, where the turbid currents were surging. If he really wanted to find a suitable example, it would be the altar spiderweb that he had built earlier in order to deal with Rue when becoming a 2000th Mississippi. She was in a terrible situation where she was jittery at the slightest sound. However, it wasn't built upon the knowledge of the user manual. It was the wraith sign. This is interesting. The collective consciousness condensed in the fortress of the blood intent ring was the convergence of the light of reason. And this was the most fundamental meaning of configuration thinking. And the altar spiderweb was like what the wraith sign had always done. Provoked the lower-level life instincts of humans. The winner announces, the loser withers away. It made the turbid flow of greed suppress the radiance of reason. It formed the desired form amidst the chaos and ignorance. It flowed in the desired direction. Of course, Luonan believed that if he forcefully controlled it, the wraith sign's ability would be able to turn it in a positive direction. But as the saying goes, the human heart is up and the human nature is down. The smoothest effect was still to go down. This already belonged to the category of human nature. One was up, one was down. Chapter 677. The Virtual Brain System and the Wraith Sign System. Let's put it this way for now. From Luonan's standpoint, there was no meaning in deliberately distinguishing the two. It didn't matter how different their philosophies were. It was fine as long as he could use them. The combination of the two expanded a domain that the other could not reach. One could go up or down, one could ascend to heaven or enter hell. What was so bad about this? What truly needed to be paid attention to was the problem of how to combine the two. It was also the technical problem of concrete application. There was a practical situation. Rationality had a scale. It was very hard to set a ruler for emotions or emotional instincts. It was just like how Luo Nan was able to teach over 1,000 people the same knowledge in class half a month ago. He went from shallow to deep and built a complex and grand fortress of the ring of blood and will. It was true that the ruler of the mental plane was very hard to grasp. However, the continuous stacking configuration design of the fortress cleverly solved this problem. And as the 1,000 people continued to work together, their knowledge and understanding of the structure of the fortress gradually converged, forming the greatest common divisor. This was the advantage of rationality. In this aspect, the emotional instincts had an irreparable flaw. They had too many variables and were too unstable. It was very hard to use a ruler of rationality on them. Once a ruler was used, emotions could no longer be called emotions. The most fatal thing was that the gathering of turbid currents of emotions could easily go to extremes. Extremes represented loss of control. They represented the end of change. Any dynamic system that went to extremes would be a disaster. It was like a large living area covered by a silent thundercloud. The accumulation of emotions of fear could crush a successful person like Yu Qi to the point of collapse. It looked like the results were pretty good, but from the perspective of configuration thinking, this represented the destruction of the pressure transmission channel. There wasn't even a pot to boil. How could water be boiled? The distance between the lower levels and the higher levels was too far. The transmission wasn't smooth, so there was no way to talk about accumulation. So Luo Nan didn't need to wait until the very end to know that even if Yu Qi and the others were all scared to death, they wouldn't be able to touch a single hair of the mastermind behind the scenes. Luo Nan held onto the railing of the balcony. His gaze swept over the rooftop over and over again. From his perspective, this group of men and women who were partying and indulging in debauchery had some homogenization tendencies under these circumstances. But when he carefully examined the human heart, he found that it was full of colors. Tributaries and whirlpools were everywhere. There was a large amount of usable element. If he simply used power to suppress them and make them converge into one, it would become a beginner game of size. There was no technique to speak of, and there was no meaning in thinking. Was there really no other way? That might not be the case. Luo Nan knocked on the railing, and his thoughts formed amidst the popping sounds. He cast himself into the even more distant depths of the mental space. On a plane that almost no one could reach, the strange and bewitching Darksider species responded. It slowly stretched out its limbs and its 6 eyes flickered with an extraordinary splendor. At this moment, the Wraith sign was actually far away in the cloud world. Luo Nan had been using it to guard that place all this time, to monitor the opening of the palace, and to serve as the hub for the transportation of time and space. It was the safest and most suitable for emergencies. However, on the plane of the polar domain, Luo Nan's connection with the Wraith sign wasn't hindered by Renku. Luo Nan wasn't prepared to transfer this fellow back. He just issued a special command. Luo Nan's eyes lit up a few seconds later. Countless threads of light crisscrossed in the depths of the void. They converged and weaved layer upon layer to construct a boundless and deep spider web. Blood flowed on every strand of spider silk. The ends could not be seen, and it was unknown where the blood flowed to in the end. This was the altar spider web constructed by the Wraith sign. Back then, the Wraith sign had used 2 days and 2 nights to practically crawl through every corner of Xia City and its surroundings in order to deal with the dangerous situation caused by the incident with the 2000th mist. It didn't matter if it was an ability user or a normal person. It didn't matter if it was an important member of the military or government, or if it was a capital power. All parties involved. There was certainly a considerable portion of innocent people who were caught in the crossfire. As long as they could be infiltrated, they were glued together by the spider's silk. They were pulled into this numerous and complicated network. This was a network system that Luo Nan had provided the creativity and format framework. The Wraith sign had constructed layer upon layer of a network system. Its internal operating mechanism was undoubtedly driven by the turbid flow of human desires. Rue Wen's value was the inducement, and the internal mechanism of the winner takes all, the loser wither and die, provided unending support. Right now, the spider web system was a bit desolate. After all, the incident with the 2000th miss had already passed. Those bounty hunters who were driven by greed and tried to sneak into Xia City to make a fortune had all scattered like birds and beasts. Without a clear goal, a competitive relationship could not be formed. There was no environment of the winner takes all, the loser wither and die. But Luo Nan remembered that the operation of the altar spiderweb was extremely good during that period of time. Extreme situations did not appear. Why was it like this? The answer was actually very simple. This system did not avoid the drawbacks of extreme emotions. On the contrary, it used this characteristic wantonly. The altar spider web system was like a net-like topological structure. Large amounts of nodes were connected to each other. They interacted with each other, but they did not possess any special characteristic. The failure of a single node or a portion of a node would not affect the altar spider web system at all. The winner takes all, the loser wither and die. This principle was established on the basis of millions of similar nodes. When a single node or a portion of a node exploded with extreme emotions, the value of the node would be seized to the greatest limit. The other nodes would divide and consume the value, and then they would be discarded. The method was simple and crude, but it avoided the negative effects of the spread of extreme emotions to the greatest limit. And the open system ensured that new nodes would constantly join in. To put it a bit more extreme, this system could continue to operate as long as the people of Earth did not die. It could endlessly change the target of greed, induce people to kill each other, and continue to accumulate power without end. From Luo Nan's current perspective, it was undoubtedly the most suitable construction method for the turbid flow of emotions. It was even possible to use the altar spider web right now. In fact, the vast majority of people present were stuck to the spider web. All it took was a command to open it. But there was something that needed to be said one more time. It was far too crude. Even though Luo Nan's thoughts were purely theoretical, he was still a bit afraid of this vicious logic of life and death. If he were to use the group of people on the rooftop as an experiment, he would have to let them kill each other in order to optimize the configuration of their life force. Well, although the vast majority of the things on the rooftop weren't anything good using this sort of method, wouldn't it look a bit ugly? Plus, the extremes of the control methods ensured that the system was not extreme. This would imperceptibly suppress the system's automatic regulation function. It still could not be considered a qualified dynamic system. Here comes the wine. Fineo 72, one of the first batch of wineries to be rebuilt after the war. In any case, it's just a drinking scene. Donglu pulled out a bottle of expensive red wine from God knows where and presented it like a treasure. In the end, he tried his best to act cool. However, the monkey-butt face caused by alcohol greatly reduced the effect. Luo Nan didn't turn around. This brother braced himself and moved closer, following Luo Nan's line of sight to look outside. He was misdirected, believing that Luo Nan was looking at the spring scenery in the pool. He took advantage of the alcohol to laugh out loud. Don't worry about that. Those maggots in the pool. Don't look at how they're usually lecherous and hungry. But with this weather and this water temperature, they're definitely caterpillars right now. Do you think they're like that? They don't really look like it. Luo Nan rarely chatted with Donglu ever since he arrived on the rooftop. Donglu was stimulated, and his mouth became more and more unrestrained. It's just that this wine isn't strong enough. Let's change it to high-quality grain wine. Our traditional Shaozi and Erguotu will warm up the body. Your brother will go down and give you a demonstration. Thinking back, I trained in the Coastal Defense Force for 2 months. I lay on the ice and lay in the snow in the middle of winter, and I charged into the sea naked. Luo Nan didn't need to examine He Donglu on the mental plane to know that his words weren't entirely true. However, Luo Nan's current interest wasn't here. He casually swirled the red wine glass in his hand as he looked at the loser dogs in the pool who were howling strangely. They were doing everything they could to climb up to the shore of the pool, but they were kicked down by their bad-hearted companions and pulled down. The pool by the shore was filled with screams and curses. Even if there was a beauty by their side, who would have the leisure to toss and turn? Luo Nan watched a few rounds and suddenly had some thoughts. The material determines the consciousness. What? The reason why human desires are stubborn is because they are rooted in the fundamental needs of the body. If there's no material foundation, the corresponding desires will be greatly reduced. Therefore, I still need to attack from the material plane. I don't need to be too bloody. Sometimes, a ladle of cold water is enough. Depolarization, or in other words, sage time. Luo Nan slapped the railing. Using the wraith sign to seize the essence of others, this line of thought was feasible in terms of structure. It was more inclined toward a normal configuration design. However, the problem of the ruler was not solved. Opening the line of thought of depolarization was like finding a buffer method. He carved a mark on the ruler, but this was still not enough. It was far from enough. He Donglu, who was next to Luo Nan, couldn't help but roll his eyes when he saw Luo Nan pondering over there. He took the initiative to clink glasses with Luo Nan and indicated to Luo Nan to experience something more interesting. It would be a pity if you didn't find a few prey in such a good position. Speaking of which, there are a lot of girls staring at the two of us standing here. Believe it or not. Hey, that one. He Donglu scanned the target. Look, the one with the sapphire blue dress. Wow, it's the most suitable color scheme for fair skin and beautiful look. It's practically glowing. Haven't you noticed? She's already scanned over here quite a few times in this period of time. Who do you think her prey is? Luo Nan didn't mind He Donglu disturbing his train of thought with his previous gains. He actually hoped that this fellow could give him some more inspiration. He looked over according to He Donglu's words and saw a familiar face. Fei Jin. Hey, you know her. Sort of. The lady on the rooftop noticed Luo Nan's line of sight as they spoke. She smiled and raised her cup, greeting him from afar. Damn, it really is you. Hurry up and raise your cup. Where's your manners? He Donglu urged Luo Nan over and over again. He hated that he couldn't reach out and help Luo Nan raise his cup. Luo Nan curled his lips. In the end, he still raised his cup and drank a mouthful of the slightly astringent wine. Chapter 678. He Donglu whistled. He forgot himself and simply extended his elbow to rest on Luo Nan's shoulder. I dare to bet that he's definitely looking for you. Don't worry. Alcohol, medicine, oil, and all sorts of equipment are available here. Do you want me to guide you on the spot? Luo Nan just stared at him, not letting him go until this fellow stuffed his mouth with a wine cup. At this point, He Donglu's thoughts of taking advantage of the alcohol had been beaten away. He was a bit listless, but he still forced his way over to Luo Nan's side. He spoke to Luo Nan here and there, speaking some random words. He Donglu did his best, but Luo Nan's response was always indifferent. This made He Donglu feel rather defeated. Little did he know that Luo Nan was currently observing him with interest. For the sake of finding inspiration, Luo Nan had been observing the deep structure of the turbid flow of the human heart from various angles and levels, such as the altar and the spider web. He Donglu was also a window. Most of the people around the rooftop were in chaos. They were like molecules moving in a disorderly manner without direction. This was very normal. Even if they weren't chaotic normally, they would certainly be chaotic under the effects of alcohol and drugs. He Donglu himself was also in a mess, but upon closer examination, this bro's words and actions clearly displayed a pattern. Was He Donglu really drunk? This couldn't be faked, but even in this state, he still instinctively closed the distance between him and Luonan. He feared Luonan's reaction, and he made timely adjustments. Let's not talk about how clumsy he was. On the other hand, his companions, such as the chest-touching woman in the elevator, had no misgivings in their actions and words. After arriving on the rooftop, they just let themselves go, disappearing without a trace. They were much more free than He Donglu. In terms of family background, He Donglu was a level stronger than his dog meat friends. In terms of personality, from his early performance, this bro was a perverse person. He was absolutely not someone who was easy to deal with. Then, why did such a contrast appear? The difference was that He Donglu knew what sort of person Luonan was and what sort of energy he possessed. On the other hand, his gang of scoundrels knew absolutely nothing about Luonan. Luonan was a ruler. However, this standard wasn't objective. It was reflected in various forms in the hearts of different people. These people used the Luonan ruler within their own understanding to measure and control their own actions. If Luonan weighed heavily in someone's heart and was a great threat, then the ability to mutate that person's behavior and consciousness would be stronger. On the other hand, if Luonan didn't weigh much in someone's heart, to the point that they didn't even have an impression of him, then it wouldn't be considered a mutation or an influence. To put it bluntly, it was an instinct to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages. He Donglu's performance was a typical example, but it wasn't the most intense. Luonan recalled the situation when he first appeared on this balcony. He seemed to be able to hear quite a few people wailing in their hearts on the balcony. Using oneself as a ruler, it was quite interesting to make a horizontal comparison. Then again, what was Luonan really going to do to certain people? The soundless thundercloud had already stopped, and he didn't make any further moves. However, the human mind's imagination and deductive ability were very developed, especially in a tense state. Even an elite of the Order of Justice like Li Taixing was not immune to this. It was inevitable that he would exaggerate and deform. In this way, what they were fighting against was no longer the real Luonan. Instead, it was the Luonan ruler that Luonan had projected into their minds. It was an illusory image and situation. It was a demonic shadow that they could not grasp and see through. From start to finish, Luonan did nothing more than exert an initial pressure, awakening the Luonan ruler in everyone's hearts and giving them a negative vector. Then, the human mind naturally continued to operate and communicate, endlessly expanding the scale and rendering the influence. In the end, it converged into a destructive tide of filth. Of course, other rulers could be used in the operation of the real world. Money, beauty, power, they were all examples. Back when Luonan constructed the altar network during the 2000th Miss incident, didn't he use Rue 1 as a ruler? But how could these things be easier to control than oneself? Simply speaking, Luonan just needed to control himself. He could use his own happiness and anger to affect the happiness and anger of others. He could interfere with the choices of others. Within the network of the human mind formed by social relationships, everything was logical and logical. When the target was greedy, he would release the bait. When the target was angry, he would give the stimulation. When the target was fearful, he would use strong pressure. Luonan himself was a regulator. With the existence of the Wraith sign and its Wraith sign system, he could easily interfere with the mental world of the vast majority of people. He could accurately transmit information. This made it easier to expand and contract the Luonan ruler and influence the actions of those people. It could be as direct and crude as the silent thundercloud, or it could be indirect and tactful. He could guarantee the stability, sensitivity, and precision needed to take the initiative to the greatest extent. Yes, this was the active intervention technique that Luonan needed. It was the correct logic of 10 times the effort is worth 10 times the effort. As long as it was someone who knew me, it was impossible for them to not be affected by this intervention. This was a hurdle that could not be crossed in the face of an enemy. This gave Luo Nan the opportunity to control and influence. Anyone under the heavens who knows me will be weighed by me. The corner of Luo Nan's lips curled up. He nodded in all seriousness. That's a good way of putting it. You really want to instruct me on the spot? He Donglu was about to be smacked silly by the Luonan ruler. He was completely unaware that an enormous disparity had already appeared in the direction of the two's thinking. The difference in the level of thinking could even be counted in light years. Luonan laughed as he patted He Donglu's shoulder. Get lost. Right now, Luonan needed some peaceful space. After his basic train of thought was clear, he needed to properly think about the framework and practical operational problems. He still considered using the altar's spiderweb as a basic framework, but he no longer played it to the extreme. In terms of methods to guide the turbid flow of emotions, he slightly floated up from the level of soul-searching and life-seizing. He borrowed the network to extract a person's essence energy, affect the state of the fleshly body, and form a valve for emotional control. As the core medium, Luonan's Luonan ruler would accurately and effectively transmit information and correct the state of the node. Of course, this was a comprehensive project. The more precise control was needed, the more technical problems would be encountered. For example, purely absorbing a person's essence energy required not only the wraith sign, but it also required an accurate grasp of the body's structure and state. Right now, the knowledge of the root receptacle, root nature, and root trigger that he learned from Gym Master Xiao could be put to use. All of these required constant adjustment. Luonan didn't expect to be able to solve the problem with just a few thoughts. It just so happened that he could perform a few observations and small experiments on the lively and restless rooftop. Luonan was already a bit impatient. He had even mobilized the external neuron to form a virtual workspace. He began to work accurately and immediately. He Donglu was really stupefied. He didn't understand the young man in front of him at all. What was up with him fiddling with the virtual workspace and doing drawing homework at the slightest disagreement? Oh, he heard that Luonan's sketching skills were superb. Could it be that a beauty was about to arrive and he was preparing to draw as a souvenir? Then he suddenly came to a realization. No matter what angle he understood it from, Luonan's words really meant that he wanted him to get lost. Young master, he was extremely embarrassed for a time. There was a knock on the door just as he was in a daze. He Donglu immediately grabbed the lifesaver that helped him out of this predicament. He placed his wine glass to the side and laughed out loud. The time to honor the bet has come. It's definitely that. What's it called again? He was about to move to open the door as he spoke, but he was grabbed by the arm just as his feet moved. He looked back in shock and saw Luonan reach out to grab him. Luonan shook his head slightly. Wait a moment. What's wrong? The ruler that should be there is gone. He Donglu subconsciously looked at the virtual workspace. He was dazzled by all the operating tools on the toolbar over there. Only the heavens knew where the ruler was. Fei Jin stood outside the door, quietly waiting. Several dozen kilometers away, Yinlu took a deep breath. A virtual workspace was projected in front of her as well. Large amounts of analytical diagrams were drawn on it. These were the results of her hard work over the past few days. They were the most detailed analysis of the target she was about to meet. Right now, it was time to verify it. Actually, Yinlu was very hesitant in her heart. With Fei Jin's outer shell, it didn't match her persona if she didn't greet or get close to Luonan when she saw him in the middle of an event. But if she were to rashly approach him, especially after the incident just now, it would truly be extremely dangerous. She had to admit that she was shocked by the might of the silent thundercloud. Yinli's eyes focused on a series of analytical diagrams. Starting from the analysis of the personality mask, Luonan had 3 types of relatively common personality masks. They were the mask of weakness used to face his family, the mask of strength used to face the environment of the inner world, and the mask of ideology that occupied a dominant position in his personality. The silent thundercloud wreaked havoc was undoubtedly triggered by the mask of strength. According to the pieced-together intelligence, Enlu roughly knew that a mutant infection had occurred, and it was related to Quantum Corporation. This sort of thing had already happened once in Xia City. Luonan had seen through it and promptly dealt with it. It was said that an extraordinary had personally made a move against Luonan. Clearly, a death grudge had already been formed. At that time, the Blood Flame Order had already been expelled from Xia City. They were cleaning up the mess in D City, so they didn't have a deep understanding of the details of the situation. They didn't have complete intelligence right now. But in terms of the nature of the situation, since it involved the level of the inner world, the mask of strength was quite normal. However, Enlu noticed that the effects of the silent thundercloud were far too wide. Even a normal person who knew nothing about extraordinary powers would feel uncomfortable when faced with this invisible pressure. Only the drunkards on the rooftop would ignore the effects and laugh and giggle. Analyzing Luonan's personality, his mask of strength and mask of weakness had a clear direction. It manifested itself in a rapid and unforeseen switch. But once the scope of the attack expanded, the mask of ideology would often surface. This was because Luonan was mostly pondering over complex and abstruse theories at this time. He was verifying his thoughts, his studies, and his gains. He had forgotten himself, so how could he care about whether or not other people would be caught in the crossfire? It was even possible that Luonan was intentionally conducting experiments. Luonan was capable of doing such a thing under the mask of ideology. According to the intelligence, Luonan possessed a keen insight that ordinary people were unable to understand. Now that he had delivered himself to the door, the uncertainties were too high. Was his decision too hasty? Chapter 679. Lady Halder closed her eyes slightly and her body swayed slightly. It seemed that she was tired of the night and had already fallen asleep. But Enlu remembered very clearly that when she was hesitating just now, it was Mrs. Halder who had told her, "Controlling the distance doesn't mean much to Luonan, but it is indispensable to us. Luonan has noticed you. Perhaps he has already completed his analysis, but you don't know anything about his current situation. So what's the point of avoiding him?" His boss's attitude was calm as usual, but the meaning behind his words was a little strange. Ever since that night when he analyzed the mask, Enlu couldn't figure out what was going on. No matter what, she had already knocked on the door, and Enlu had no other choice. She could only comfort herself by saying, "It's just a shell company that's taking the lead now. At worst, I'll just give up some funds and escape." A few seconds later, the door opened. The one who opened the door was Luonan's bodyguard. There was also a young man who was forcefully pushed out. According to the intelligence, this was the young master of the He family. He and Luonan had been on the balcony when the two sides had met face to face. But now it looked like they had been expelled from the country. There was a moment of chaos at the entrance. Fei Jin didn't even have the chance to say the words she had prepared for her. She was led into the room by the bodyguard in a daze, and the door was immediately closed. He Donglo's disorderly shouts could still be heard from outside. Enlu quickly adjusted her state of mind. At this time, the lighting in the room and the dazzling lights on the rooftop reflected Luonan's figure in the depths of Fei Jin's pupils. This 16-year-old boy was leaning against the railing of the balcony, facing her. Coincidentally, a virtual workspace was projected in front of him. It was similar to the one Enlu was using, but there was more white space on it. There were only some messy lines in the center, but he couldn't see the outline of it. This verified Enli's judgment, but it wasn't a good thing for her. Right now, Luonan was under the guidance of the mask of rationality. He was in a working state and he was in the most troublesome and dangerous state. Enlu was extremely careful. She strictly followed the plan and gave Fei Jin a weak stimulation to her self-awareness. she let Fei Jin communicate with Luo Nan in her most accustomed state. Fei Jin was a woman who was very good at making use of her asset. After a long period of working and living, she had developed a set of communication skills that were engraved in her instincts. She smiled faintly, erasing all the edges and corners, showing the proper humility and respect. Yet, he crossed the line in the way he addressed her. "Junior Luo, can this woman still live?" Luo Nan's abrupt words instantly jumped out of Fei Jin's instincts and Yin Li's preset context. Luo Nan's thoughts staggered, causing Fei Jin, who was at the scene, and Yin Luo, who was dozens of kilometers away, to be stunned for half a second. Yin Luo finally understood the true meaning of Luo Nan's words in this half a second. In that instant, Yin Luo felt as if she had been pierced by a sharp blade that pierced through her heart. However, before the blood from the pain and panic could flow out, it was replaced with emptiness. Luo Nan allowed Fei Jin and the controller behind her to stare blankly. His hands did not stop moving. He continued to draw gentle and unfurl lines in the virtual work area. The blurry outline from before was more or less revealed within a short few seconds. This was a sketch with Fei Jin as the model. Luo Nan used the technique of combining lines and surfaces. His many years of skill made this work of art simple and vivid. It basically displayed Fei Jin's appearance and characteristics, accurately capturing the astonished expression on her face. Then, he borrowed the contrast between light and dark to draw out some meaning beyond the drawing. Luo Nan was very satisfied with this work. Aside from his drawing skills, there were some lines within the drawing that formed the life sketch on a level that no one else understood. They were actually the connecting lines of the stars that formed the life sketch. They flickered within Luo Nan's living starry sky, revealing the core mysteries of life that belonged to Fei Jin. There was also a portion that involved the structure of the altar's spiderweb. Fei Jin belonged to the altar's spiderweb. At the very least, she belonged to the nodes of the altar's spiderweb. Today's situation provided excellent reference material for researching the damage and changes of the node. As for the newest and most important drawing, it still belonged to Luo Nanqi. Unfortunately, it was already a wreckage. It was simply not complete. Luo Nan stopped drawing. In these few seconds, he had already dissected the woman before his eyes from the structure of her body and soul, the turbid flow of her emotions, the spiderweb nodes, and many other aspects. Elements that should be there, but weren't there. Elements that shouldn't be there, but were there, naturally appeared before his eyes. Her appearance was so contradictory. How could one believe that the woman before their eyes was a complete Fei Jin? Luo Nan suddenly felt a bit of regret. He should have used this person observation technique on Li Yiwei earlier. Even if he was unable to see through the preset mechanism of the conditional format lock, he would still be able to grasp more detailed information from the side, allowing him to apply it to the target location 2,000 kilometers away. It's never too late to mend the pen after the sheep is lost. Wait a minute. Did he complicate the problem again? Just when would this accumulation of layers and layers come to an end? Luo Nan thought of the great project of remodeling the structure of his mental senses that he was currently undertaking. He could not help but sigh. Only now did he truly raise his eyes to look at Fei Jin, who stood stupidly in the living room. His gaze pierced through her pupils, touching upon the consciousness hidden in the depths of her mind. Several dozen kilometers away, Yin Luo finally reacted with great difficulty. But she directly felt Luo Nan's calm and clear gaze from Fei Jin. Her heart thumped loudly for a time, shaking her chest, throat, and even the space between her lips and teeth. Such a scene was simply like a thriller, but it was much more vivid than the vast expanse of emptiness that seemed to be facing death. Escape. This was the first thought that popped into Yin Li's mind after she recovered her normal thoughts. Of course, she had considered the extreme situation of her shell company being knocked open. She had made the relevant contingency plans. Even though she never thought that her shell company would collapse this quickly, She understood that the most important thing right now was to cut off this thread. Inlo did not even bother to ask her boss for instructions. Her thoughts stirred, and she wanted to forcefully sever the connection between Fei Jin and the Blood Soul Temple of the Yuan district. However, her actions on the mental plane actually did not produce any effect. She invisibly melted away. At the same time, over at Aurora Cloud City, Fei Jin, who was standing in the middle of the room, spoke. Affected by the forced attachment of her soul, this person will certainly need some time to recuperate in order to recover from the damage related to the mutation of her neuronal structure. The probability of mental illness appearing in the future will be on the higher side. I apologize for using this method to meet you, Mr. Luo. I'm Mei Hald. Inlo froze. And over at Aurora Cloud City, several dozen kilometers away, Qin Ikuan and God, who had been confused by Luo Nan's abrupt words, heard the name that came out of Fei Jin's mouth. They used about 1/10 of a second to understand the contradictions and errors within, and then they straightened their bodies. Qin Ikuan cried out involuntarily, "Mrs. Halder." In the end, Fei Jin's foundation was good. Even though she was just a mouthpiece, she still perfectly embodied the corresponding bearing. She didn't pay any attention to the astonished emotions of the two bodyguards. She maintained a dignified and steady posture as she looked straight at Luo Nan. "Can we have a private space to talk, Mr. Luo?" Qin Ikuan immediately dissuaded him. In fact, he was already reporting this latest situation to He Wayne. On the balcony, Luo Nan spun his digital pen. His expression didn't change, but his eyes were filled with interest. He really wanted to add a few more strokes to the sketches in the work area right now. He wanted to display the new characteristics of Fei Jin and make his own work even more perfect. Let's just forget about it. There's no end to the layers. Yeah, I'm saying that you don't need to mind. Of course you can. Luo Nan indicated to Fei Jin that she could directly come to the balcony. Then he smiled at the two bodyguards. The mouthpiece isn't a threat. It can't smash people to death. Fei Jin had already slowly stepped onto the balcony as he spoke. The intense cold wind from high up in the sky welcomed her face, stirring her hair. She was so vivid that she seemed like a painting once more. Luo Nan merely snapped his fingers, and the AI butler closed the glass door, separating the balcony from the main hall of the room. It formed a semi-private space that was better than nothing. Someone blew a sharp whistle from below the balcony at this time. He Donglu had already moved to the balcony. He found a suitable angle to look over, looking like he was ready to properly appreciate and cheer. This fellow's actions brought about a hoot from a group of people. The surrounding environment was quite noisy for a time. Luo Nan shook his head. Actually, there's no need to go through so much trouble. There's no point in adding another segment. I know you, Mrs. Halder, and Manager Ian. Long time no see. Boom. Ian Lee's heart suddenly throbbed, so much so that her body trembled. It wasn't just because of Luo Nan's greeting. It was also because the channel through which this greeting was transmitted bypassed Fei Jin. It was the most incisive and direct method to reverberate on the mental plane. At this very moment, Inlu inexplicably recalled Luo Nan's world-shaking speech from half a month ago. She had studied the relevant video over and over again during this time. She had practically memorized every detail, and there was a paragraph that Luo Nan had said when he announced the cage hypothesis and denied the classical theory of the three belt. When I engraved a mark in your domain, I made direct contact with you. I violated you. I took the initiative to violate you, and you passively endured it. Inlo had once seriously imagined and discussed with her boss. She had experimented with this situation, but when this situation entered the plane of reality and reappeared on her body, she discovered that she wasn't prepared at all. Was it humiliation? Of course it was humiliation. But she was even more unable to conceal her shock and even fear. A certain basic concept of space appeared. 80 kilometers. Ian Lu and Mrs. Halder's temporary residence was located at the junction of Dongqing District and Waterfront District. It was over 80 kilometers away from the Pingjiang District where Aurora Cloud City was located. Ian Li's mind was a bit absent-minded. For a time, she wasn't too clear on the true meaning of this distance. She subconsciously looked at Mrs. Halder, who was sitting on the rocking chair. She remembered that her boss seemed to have said something about distance. Now it was a prophecy. It was only now that Mrs. Halder slowly opened her eyes. She swept an indifferent gaze over Ian Lu, but she didn't express anything else. At the very least, this was how it looked on the surface. The problem was that Ian Lu had followed Mrs. Halder for many years. How could she not know the information contained within her boss's micro-expressions? Ian Li's mind became clear on the direction of her boss's gaze, and her mind became clear and cold.